We're live. All right. I am joined today with the effeminate degenerate, aka Lapis. Um, we were just shooting the shit for a minute, just talking about the lulz that is the YouTube and Twitter sphere.
Yeah.
The issue that we decided we're going to go fight to the death over, because we were robbing everybody's time to talk about capitalism after we brutalized everyone's sleep schedule by talking about how to end racism. Today we're going to be very fluid with this discussion to talk about gender. I can't think of anything creative to say for the third one, but we're talking about gender, whether it's a spectrum or binary. Now, for those who don't know, I did have a debate about this one time, and I've listened to it since, and I will say this with gender, that I honestly don't really care if it is a spectrum or binary, but I do find the discussion fascinating.
Mm-hmm. So it's more like an academic exercise for you.
Yeah, so debate, discussion, whatever you want to call it, potato. I just remember that it was a really heated debate. Like if gender was like an ice cube, it was definitely fluid after that debate.
Yeah.
But yeah, I will say that, but for opening statements, maybe it's a good idea to talk about how we got involved in the topic. So it was basically 400 years ago, it feels like, when I first heard about there being potentially other genders. And I was like, never heard of that. So people would talk about how there's non-binary, agender, genderqueer, gender fluid. Yeah. Whatever your heart could imagine, it's there. And I thought, I dismissed the notion, but not in a disrespectful way. And that is something I do want to say to those who think there's only two genders. If you don't think non-binary people exist, treat them like that. Don't acknowledge them. If you think, oh, that person's non-binary, instead of saying something mean, treat them like how you think they are. If you think they don't exist, don't acknowledge them. Like that is something I've always thought about since that debate I did with Owen all this time ago. And I talk to LGBT people about the issues of trans people, and I talk about spectrums and gender and all that stuff. And I have met a few people who identify as gender fluid or whatever, and it's rather interesting when they talk about the differences between sex and gender, and sometimes there are conflicting statements, but to be fair, it's different people, so you're never going to get like a consistent record of the opinions. Mm-hmm. But all in all, I don't buy that there is more than two. However, I'm not going to like call someone, I'm not going to call them a name and dislike their video and leave thousands of nasty comments. I'm just going to ignore it.
Okay.
How did you get involved with the topic of gender? If you don't mind me asking.
So it would be quite a similar way to you. I heard about the concept when my friends were making fun of Tumblr, and they just posted all these links to these ridiculous genders, and I thought, well, this is a silly concept. But when I actually looked into the issue, and when I started to move more to the left about a year ago, and I started to see, how gender and sex could, it did seem to be more of a spectrum than a binary, and how they didn't really seem to be always, these intermeshed concepts that were completely irremutable from each other, but rather, too often interrelated but distinct concepts. And I thought it was very interesting. And I will say that we should acknowledge that, for a lot of people, it can be very upsetting to have their identity under debate. And, I'm lucky enough to be a trans person that isn't non-binary, so I don't have to, constantly have my identity under attack by different sorts of people. And it's something that would be a very hard reality to deal with, having all these people constantly skeptical of what you say you are and how you feel and how you interact with the world, especially when there's so much evidence to back it up. But anyway, I digress.
Now coming back to like debating someone's identity. Now, when it comes to the whole, this person's a coward if they don't debate their gender identity with me. Now, to be completely honest, the whole I want to have rational discussions is very disingenuous from those type of people who demand to debate every 30 seconds. I will say this, that, whenever I interact with someone who says, oh, I'm non-binary, I just go along with it. I used to have this militant mindset where I would go out of like I wouldn't go out of my way to misgender them every 30 seconds or whatever. But my attitude at the time, which is not the way it is today, was if you said to me, "Oh, my pronouns are they them," I would casually say he or she.
Okay.
Okay, I actually hold that thought. My dogs are barking like spastics. I'll be right back.
Yeah. So in the meantime, while he's away, I just want to say to all, to any of the non-binary people who may be watching, who may ever watch this, I do support you. I do consider you valid. And it's, it may be tough living in a world where there are so many people who don't feel that way, but you do have my back. You do have my support, and I will do what I can to advocate for your rights and to fight for you and to make sure that you don't have to put up with, discrimination and hate and, all these barriers that exist in the world.
I don't know who you're talking to. I just see
just the audience.
Talking. All right. I don't know. Where was I? My dogs bark at everything that moves. So if you're a flower and you move,
called them he, she, when they said they.
Okay. Yeah. And over time, I guess I would just. Incredible Aspie asks, "Feminine degenerate is transgender?" Yeah, she is. And I would just say that, I guess it was over time I became less of a hothead, and I just saw it as like, you know what, this is a problem. Like, if people's biggest deal is, oh, this person says they're non-binary, oh, I wish I had your life where it was that first world problem, like that much of a first world problem. Like, I wish things were that simple.
I mean, being non-binary can often get you kicked out of your home, just like being trans. So it's, it can sometimes be a very difficult thing. But complaining about non-binary, and that's the worst issue in the world, I'd say that's a first world problem.
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather have the lives of those complaints. Like, if that is how simple your life is, about, I wish I had that. I wish I had life that easy. But I guess we can include trans issues if you want in this discussion, just in case it goes quicker than anticipated.
Okay, sure.
Now, with sex being a gender and spectrum, I did bring up like almost as if it was a quote from the Bible because of how much I'd bring it up. People would talk about, I'd have conversations with people who would talk about sex and gender, and they'd say, there's a gender spectrum, and they would acknowledge saying, oh yeah, biological sex is a thing. And let me see if I can find what I was even on about when I would talk about this with people.
Okay.
Because I don't know what it was, but I just kept bringing it up so many times. I think Owen would have repeated it verbatim if someone would have, because I drilled that into his head. But oh yeah, people constantly, they bring up the definition, the Google definition of gender, right?
Yeah.
They'll say the state of being male or female, male or female, typically used with reference to social and cultural differences rather than biological ones.
Yes.
Which, I mean, I know this is semantics, but this sounds more like you could be fluid between male and female. Like, this could apply to trans men and women, but I guess I'd be reading too close into it. However, when you look at the synonym is sex, and I think this is what I brought up a lot. You Google the word sex, like, you'd have to be more specific, like biological sex. Let me type that in because I got the result I was not looking for. Biological sex definition. And I talked about it, but like, I'm not saying that just a simple definition is the most reliable, but it's a good way to define what terms you're using.
Yeah, I will say that definitions are fluid. So the term ejaculate used to mean to say something in a fast and sudden way. Nowadays, the modern definition is quite different. So language is fluid, and it wouldn't be otherwise. It wouldn't be a very good instrument for human communication. And so at one time, sex and gender may have been synonymous concepts, but when moving towards a more modern adaptation of, more modern interpretation of gender, it's necessary to kind of, separate these two things. Separate biological sex, which, people can see as a reality. There's, there are men, there are women, and there are, the various intersex conditions. And then there is gender, which is a whole host of different social constructions. Anyway, this is the definition of gender that I use. And I think a lot of people like your definition of gender because it's very simple. But this one, I think, more properly encapsulates the nuances of these sorts of issues. So gender is the relationship between the following three aspects of identity. The gendered body, so that would be your genitalia, secondary sex characteristics, your gender identity, or who we internally know ourselves to be, and our gender expression, and that's how we present our gender to the world. So my gender identity is a woman. Biologically, I am male, but I in public, due to certain people in my life, I have to express my gender in a male way. But in private, I express my gender. I express my gender as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that definition more properly encapsulates, the nuances of the subject of gender, as opposed to just thinking that they're all just this one big conglomerate.
And I'll go into intersex, what you said there in a second, but for sex, I'll save what I have to say for the whole trans issues thing in a second. But for the because there's actually a page called Sex and Gender Distinction. In humans, typical male or female sexual differentiation includes the presence or absence of a Y chromosome, the type of gonads, the sex hormones, the internal reproductive anatomy, such as uterus in females, and the external genitalia. People with mixed sex factors are unisex. Unisex. That's no intersex.
Unisex.
That word just popped on the screen. I'm not dyslexic, but Jesus, I don't know where that word came from.
Mm-hmm.
Oh no, wait, it mentions in a few articles later. I just switched the words, but what the incredible Aspie. Jesus, he's typing. I will have to agree with Aspie that intersex is a medical condition. However, I hate it. I hate it when they talk about intersex people, they just seem to go about it in such a degrading, dehumanizing way. It makes it talking about it just all the more depressing.
Yeah, although that being I don't know, how is it a medical condition? I mean, it's kind of abnormal to be born with intersex characteristics, but the whole medical condition thing just seems to be unnecessarily stigmatizing to what is just kind of a weird way of being born. It's like saying it was 6 fingers is a medical condition.
I mean, your ability to do things, and maybe you could call it that. I mean, I'm just glad he didn't call it a birth defect. I did it one time. I do regret that. I felt like that was a little too not edgy, but more a little too sharp or jaded, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that it is an anomaly, but not to say that intersex people don't exist.
Yeah.
I mean, whenever people would bring up the single X chromosome argument, let me get the see where I put it. What I had for this. I mean, I can apply the analogy. For instance, my dresser, the corner of it is broken off because when I was a little kid, I was an asshole, and I would jump around from furniture to furniture because I thought I was a badass, and I broke the edge of it, and it's been that way ever since. All right, so the X chromosome in humans and other mammals, a sex chromosome, 2 of which are normally present in females, designated XX, and only one in males, designated XY. So the page, which I will use as a source, let me click on it. Because usually when people are like X chromosome, they mention how that's intersex, but it mentions that it's still the person in question is still female. So it says females have 2 X chromosomes, while males have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome.
Yeah.
In early embryonic development in females, one of the 2 X chromosomes is randomly and permanently inactivated in cells other than the egg cells. The phenomenon is called X inactivation or lionization. X inactivation ensures that females, like males, have 1 functional copy of the X chromosome in each body cell. Because inactivation is random in normal females, the X chromosome is inherited from the mother, is active in some cells, and the X chromosome inherited from the father, is active in other cells. I will send you the link. I think I'll send it after, but
So,
go ahead.
what would your point be?
I would say intersex people, yeah, they do exist. However, I would say it is not necessarily a birth defect or condition, but in the case that I cited as an example, X chromosome, you're still a female. You just miss a single. You're just missing a chromosome. You know, just
Well, yeah. I think you're talking about Swyer syndrome. Some intersex individuals are sterile. Some women are sterile. Like, what does that have to do with anything? So your argument is essentially that because one intersex condition is essentially just a woman with an extra chromosome, they're all.
I feel like there's a bit of a mistranslation.
Okay.
When I said X chromosome, I didn't mean extra chromosome. That's actually Down syndrome to have an extra chromosome. Yes. And not to be ableist as I say that, but that's just an example where it's like, no, you're still female. You're just missing a chromosome. And
okay.
The reason I brought up the
X is what you're thinking. Okay.
Yeah, the single X chromosome. Now, the reason I brought up the dresser, because I forgot to hammer that point in, is it's not a new type of dresser. It's not in that case, it's just a dresser that is missing an edge. In this case, in the X chromosome, the single chromosome, it's a woman who's missing one chromosome. That's pretty much it. And for other ones, you could probably say the same thing in different things, where there's like men with XXY chromosomes, and all the other ones, you could probably find the same result, where you're a male or you're a female, but you have an extra or two extra chromosomes, or you are missing one.
Yeah, but like, how do you define male? XY, having male secondary sex characteristics. Like, how would you say both are needed to classify someone as clearly male? Because these extra chromosomes do obviously have effects, and sometimes intersex individuals are born with these. These abnormalities, which would seem to contradict what we would typically associate as rigidly male, rigidly female, and that would add a bit of nuance in between the two.
I actually say that is actually something I don't necessarily disagree with, where it's where it's not necessarily rigid, but it would be like, I don't know. I would say that I don't necessarily agree with the rigid idea that you're like, I'll say this, that you can tie it in with chromosomes or sex characteristics or hormone levels, but it's not a solid like across the board thing with hormones. And the same maybe can be said with intersex conditions, but I'd say you could, I don't know, intersex male, intersex female, but I would define male, to answer your question. I would define male as is simply a person who, if you do have the XY chromosome, but that I'd say is a bare minimum.
Okay.
I've been thinking about it a lot, and to be fair, like when people tell me, do you think trans men are men, or do you think trans women are women? And instead of just saying, oh no, biological male or female, which you could still say this. Aspie, I don't think she'd want to, because I don't want to spoil it, but never mind. Anyway, I will say that this is something I've thought about for quite a while, since that debate on transphobia happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with trans men and women, I've thought about it a whole lot, considering the fact that this is the whole TERFs versus non-TERFs thing, and I thought I was heading in that direction at one point, and I'm like, nope, not dealing with their victim status. But with the topic of trans women, and trans men, personally, I'd lean towards yes. I would lean towards, well, not necessarily lean. I'd probably just say yeah. Not because I'm not the person that thinks that it's misogyny or sexism to say a trans woman's a woman. I do believe that the trans woman or the trans man in question, this is something they have thought about for a very long time. It's
Yeah.
probably been a grueling process. My best friend, Kai, this was something he questioned for over a decade, like the majority of his own life. So I believe he knows what he's talking about when he talks to me about this whole thing. And with the idea of you know, yeah, I mean some intersex individuals are sterile, but that is, I guess, it could be a minority. I'd have to look into that further. But I will say that with how to define a man is usually would have XY chromosomes.
Okay.
However, if you just have the secondary sex characteristics, I would still accept you as a male. If you are a trans woman, for instance, like, I wouldn't even say accept, because I don't know if I have OCD or some shit, but I just take that with a negative connotation, say accept. I just don't question whether you're a woman or not. Like, if you have the secondary sex characteristics, I would say, yeah, you're a woman. Aspie says, if you're a man, you'll always be a man biologically. And while I don't disagree with it, I'm not going to call you a man. Like,
okay.
I wouldn't.
If you're a man, you'll always be a man biologically. It seems to be like it depends on how you define man. Like if you define male as XY, then yeah, you can't change your chromosomes. But if you define it as having secondary sex characteristics of a man, I can get a womb now. I can use hormones to completely change all these secondary sex characteristics which currently characterize me. So it doesn't necessarily seem to be too helpful to say that if once is, you will always be, because there's so many different things that you can do to change that. And also it kind of ignores the question, well, the truth about sorry, here we go. This is the one I wanted to bring up. So this shows that adolescent girls and boys, sex difference and responsiveness to androstenedione was already present in prepubertal control children that's developed during early preternatal period instead of sexual maturity. Adolescent girls and boys with gender dysphoria both responded remarkably like their experienced gender, thus sex atypical. I've always experienced
Can you link that, because it's pretty grainy? It says your bandwidth is up all the way, but it's still pretty grainy. If you don't mind sending me the link.
I will send you the link, S-Man.
All right, thank you. And I'll send you the link to what I cited just for transparency. No pun intended, everybody. But I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with. I don't have a problem with if if it's either secondary sex characteristics, or if you say the chromosomes. I mean, if we go with secondary sex characteristics, I don't really have a problem with that. I mean, I hope trans women can eventually have their own kids, and that trans men can become fathers. Yes. Like, they could naturally procreate. I'll look into that later, but I hope to God that's true. Mm-hmm. And whenever I would talk to people about intersex people, to avoid being interpreted as being dehumanizing, I just think about my wording. So if I stutter a lot, it's just I'm trying to think about how to say it, but how to say it without sounding like I'm degrading the type of individual I'm speaking about, if that makes sense.
Well, that's good.
Not trying to be politically correct, but just compassionate. Let's see. Some genes on the X chromosome escape X inactivation. Many of these genes are located at the ends of each arm of the X chromosome in areas known as the pseudo-autosomal regions. Yes. Although many genes are unique to the X chromosome, genes in the pseudo-autosomal, I have to say that slowly because I'm very terrible with English sometimes, regions are present on both sex chromosomes. As a result, men and women have each two functional copies of these genes. Many genes in the pseudo-autosomal or somal regions are essential for normal development. Now, I mean, I think there are some conditions you might have with intersex. Let me see if I can find some, for instance, just as an example, and to be open and transparent instead of closed and opaque. To this point, if you want, we can go on to the Because for the most part, I don't really have an issue if someone identifies as non-binary.
Okay.
Oh wait, the screen is stuck on Lapis. Oh, okay. Apparently, I forgot to take you off of presenting because I know how to work Google Hangouts. Everyone, I'm a professional. Anyway, let me see if I can find the condition that happens. Let's see. I'm trying to think of. Do you believe hermaphrodite is a thing? I think it was actually said to have been a myth. Like you cannot have both genitalia. I think they said. Goddamn dogs. Anyway, you go ahead.
No, you can't really have both genitalia functioning.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
You can have you can have a rudiments of both, but if you can't have both functioning and thus impregnate yourself with yourself.
That'd be the strange. That I cannot imagine how that would. It would seem like, all right. So the medical classifications. I mean, if I ever wanted to if I ever wanted to give birth to kids, and if that was even possible, hey, you never have to have a partner for that, you know. Anyway, so the signs are ambiguous genitalia. I'll also link this in the description afterwards. So, and if I forget to, you all can harass me in my mentions till I do so. Ambiguous genitalia may appear as a large clitoris or a small penis. Because there is a variation in all the processes of the development of the sex organs, a child may be born with a sexual anatomy that is typically female or feminine in appearance, with a larger than average clitoris, or typically male or masculine in appearance with a smaller than average penis that is open along the underside. Okay, and then it says the appearance may be quite ambiguous, describable as female genitals with a very large clitoris, and a partially fused labia, whereas male genitals with a very small penis completely open along the midline and an empty scrotum. Fertility is variable. So in some cases, yes, you will be infertile, but in others, not necessarily. I need to stop looking at the chat. Sorry for the laughter there. The measurement systems is a medical instrument to measure the volume of the testicles. It was developed by Swiss pediatric endocrinologist Andrea Prater. The Prater scale and the Quigley scale are visual rating systems that measure genital appearance. So those are the signs, and then there's the causes themselves, which, I mean, I would read further, but I don't think there's necessarily going to be any disagreement depending on...
Nothing you've said seems to indicate that intersex must always be a variation of male or female, rather than kind of a more nuanced thing.
I mean, those are just the signs of like if someone is intersex, but
I mean, it's always, you know, it's a variation between male and female. Intersex is always this, yes, but like when the variation grows to a certain extent, it becomes like really quite difficult to classify someone as male or female. And so what doctors will often do is just make arbitrary surgeries without any sort of consent. Let's see, where did I put that?
You're not going to get any disagreement from me as I say this, that I think that should be against the law, just like circumcision of babies. Now, and the reason I say that is now, I mean, I'm not like saying, oh, you're a victim because they did that. I would say, though, that that should be totally up to the person. Like, you know, like it is considered abhorrent if you do that to a girl in the Western world. You do it to a boy, the circumcision at birth, no one cares. Like, the same.
To be fair, it doesn't necessarily have the same negative consequences, and that's probably why people care a bit less. But I'm against circumcision because, honestly, if it's supposed to be something you do to show how much you care for God, doing it as a baby won't really show anything.
Well, it's also been argued that circumcision happens because... Oh, wait, are you screen sharing? Let me present that.
I am screen sharing, aren't I?
Okay, you can, if you don't mind, because all the links you plan on sending me, well, I mean, that you're going to show in the stream, you can just send them all to me and I'll put them in the description. And like I said, everybody, if I forget, please harass me in my mentions until I do so. I can only imagine the dogpiling that's going to happen if I forget. But yeah, if I could, like, if I could just go, it'd be illegal. Like, you can't do it to, like, unless that person consents. I think it is a crime.
Mm-hmm.
Consent is key, and I'm a very huge proponent of consent when it comes to any activity between two people.
Mm-hmm.
Especially, like, I saw an interview with a trans man who was intersex but was transitioning to be a man.
Mm-hmm.
He said that I don't know if it was a transgender man or woman. I think I saw two people who had the same issue were saying that they had their clitorises removed without their consent, and just seeing the sadness and seeing how wrong it was.
Yeah.
I saw that clip like 2.5 years ago, and ever since I just said that was wrong, and that I just can't stress that enough. I guess I'll read the causes, because some people are like wondering how this happened. So I guess I could read the causes of intersex happening. The common pathway of sexual differentiation, where a productive human female has an XX chromosome pair and a productive male has an XY pair, is relevant to the development of intersex conditions. During fertilization, the sperm adds either an X female or Y male chromosome into the X ovum. This determines the genetic sex of the embryo. During the first weeks of development, genetic male and female fetuses are atomically indistinguishable. I think this is why people say all of us were female before we were born, at some point before we were born, which now that makes sense why they say that. And so anytime a fascist says you're not a real woman, just say, haha, joke's on you, we were all female at one point.
Mm-hmm.
But with the primitive gonads beginning to develop during approximately the 6th week of gestation, the gonads in a bipotential state may develop into either testes, the male gonads, or ovaries, the female gonads, depending on the consequent events. Through the 7th week, genetically female and genetically male fetuses appear identical, and that is correct. I've looked at ultrasounds. I can't tell a female or a male apart.
They just kind of look like ugly goblins.
Yes, they look like literal aliens. Around 8 weeks of gestation, the gonads of an XY embryo differentiate into functional testes, secreting testosterone. Ovarian differentiation for XX embryos does not occur until approximately week 12 of gestation. In normal female differentiation, the Mullerian duct system develops into the uterus, fallopian tubes, inner third of the vagina. In males, the Mullerian duct inhibiting hormone MIH causes this duct system to regress. Next, androgens cause the development of the Wolffian duct system, which develops into the vas deferens, seminal vessels, and ejaculatory ducts. And this is all stuff I learned by the time I was in the 6th grade. So this is stuff I'm pretty familiar with.
Common knowledge here.
Yep. Sadly, I can't say that would be the case in certain areas of the country, but I digress. By birth, the typical fetus has been completely sexed as male or female, meaning the genetic sex XY male or XX female corresponds with a phenotypical sex. That is to say, genetic sex corresponds with internal and external gonads and external appearance of the genitals. So that would be the causes, and then there's the conditions, which I don't see what's the difference between conditions and causes. Well, the conditions, I guess, is semantics aside, there are a variety of opinions on what conditions or trait are or are not intersex, but I don't think it's a variety. Well, the traits. Let me go back to where it said the when it comes to the small penis with a completely open midline and an empty scrotum, I don't really see how that could be anything other, but I guess that there could be other things, like other conditions that might mirror the same consequences. Anyhow, dependent on the definition of intersex that is used. Current human rights-based definitions stress a broad diversity of sex characteristics that differ from expectations for male or female bodies. Now, I will say this. I do not think it's a bad idea to revisit the topic of intersex with an open mind. I don't have a problem with people revisiting gender and sex and intersex and sexuality and what have you with fresh eyes, a fresh pair of eyes, and redefine some words to make more sense of the world. That aside, during 2015, the Council of Europe, the European Union Agency for Fundamental Rights, and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights have called for a review of medical classifications on the basis that they presently impede enjoyment of the right to health. The Council of Europe expressed concern that the gap between the expectations of human rights organizations of intersex people and the development of medical classifications has possibly widened over the past decade. So that is everything that's there. The page goes on for about the length of a Harry Potter novel, but I think we all get the idea.
The argument of that seems to be that there is a certain disconnect between activist groups working on behalf of intersex people and medical definitions and the medical establishment.
That is what the page was saying. I do think that maybe that could be the case, but I'm not very involved with intersex activism, so I'd have to look into that a little deeper.
Yes.
But
I mean, things like there's always been this kind of disconnect between medical establishments and psychological establishments and the people who they're purporting to describe. Like homosexuality was once considered a curable mental disorder. Now it's recognized as an inherent thing, at least by most people and by most scientific metrics. I don't see why the same couldn't be said for intersex and now non-binary issues.
Talk with, I don't know, I know this is nobody stab me in the face for Dodal here, but based off of the people I've spoken to and the types of things they would link me, which were just blog posts anyhow, they would just say that no, it's not genetic at all. It's not necessarily. They weren't saying trying to say, oh, it's just something you made up in your head, but it is something that comes from the mind, or they would explain it like that, but it's not like, oh, I just made it up on the spot, but it is something they thought about. Thought about long and hard, not just in 5 minutes.
You mean people who have transgender identities? Or non-binary, or what is this?
I was talking about non-binary people, but I mean, you could apply the same thing to other LGBT people. Yes. I don't think there's really been one that I've ever met that said, oh yeah, I thought about it in 5 minutes. It was something they thought about for the longest time, and
which is why the label transgender seems a bit ridiculous, because I
was very guilty of using that. I was very guilty of using that, and I actually regret that a lot, considering that it's because one, it was just rude and unnecessary for me to do, and it just the amount of hatred it looked like I was dispensing, even though it was just for the lulz. I don't know. I don't know. It's just a lot of reflecting and just seeing that how unnecessary it was for me to do. Oh fuck, Brandon's in the chat, but yeah, I do regret using the term transgender. But anyway, Brandon Paget in the chat says Patrick Starr is mayonnaise a gender. Squidward, no, Patrick, mayonnaise is not a gender. Patrick Starr, triggered. Oh god.
Well,
I mean, go ahead.
I don't believe in mayonnaise gender. Gender is, not about being a block of wood, or being a woodpecker. It's about being, it's about how do you relate to your experience as human? How do you relate to what society considers male and female? How do you relate to your own definition of those things? Where do you fit along the spectrum, or do you reject the spectrum, like agender? Not my gender is purple. Half of that, I think, is people trolling, seeing non-binary and thinking, okay, this is stupid. I'll troll them and make a Tumblr blog and say the color purple is a gender, fluff is a gender, unicorns are a gender, mermaids are a gender, that sort of thing. Oh, I know, Brandon. I thought it was pretty funny.
They're actually... I thought you were going to... Yeah, actually, coming back to what you said right there about color, I've seen people actually try and explain it to some people, actually using that logic. Purple's a gender, or if it was a gender, everyone, my gender's blue, because it's a... But anyway, they would bring it up how there's a color spectrum, right? There's different shades of blue, white, red. Well, they're not really white, but whatever. There'd be different shades of different colors, and they would say, could the same be said about gender? Now, like I mentioned earlier, this is not a topic I'm all that passionate about as I used to be.
Yeah.
But I do think it is fun to talk about, considering that it makes you kind of leave your jacket of it has to be this way or the highway at the door.
Yeah.
By the way, I'm not a skeptic. If I ever call myself a skeptic, all of you have the right to shoot me. Just saying. But anyway, I just saw you tweet that. I'm like, oh no, 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 fam. I'm not a skeptic. No. But so I will say that I don't really care if there is multiple genders or not.
Mhm.
I'm all for treating people like, you know what? I don't really care if you call yourself non-binary. To not make it a big deal, I'll probably just go along with it and say, all right, they, them. I've gotten really sick and tired of people being like, oh my god, you could be fined in New York or Japan or New York and Canada. I don't know why I said Japan. About if you use the wrong gender pronouns. I think that was actually, if it was true, it'd be unconstitutional to begin with. That bill saying you can't misgender people by accident, I think it'd probably go against the Constitution in a way. It'd violate the Eighth Amendment. That is why, just for those wondering. But basically, I just saw it blown out of proportion. I will say that people respecting your pronouns is not a right, but a privilege. Now, I would love it. I absolutely would love it if people would just get over it and just see that pronouns are not that big of a deal. If someone, like, when I saw your Twitter book...
Go ahead, sorry.
Go ahead. Twitter profile say she, her, I didn't freak out. I didn't grow an extra chromosome and just freak out, oh my god, she has she, her in her profile. I'm just like, okay, her profile says she, her. That's what she wants me to call her. Mm-hmm. She's not going to have any contention with me. I'm not going to raise a big deal because it's not a big deal. Like, my point is, and I think you do have contention with this, it looks like you do, that about the whole no one has to respect your pronouns. I would like it if people respect is something you have to earn. It can't necessarily be given, but being polite and decent to other people is not asking very much. Like, I don't know you very well and you don't know me very well, but but I have no problem showing you politeness and decency. And I say that to everybody in the Poor Bastards chat and for those who troll my comment section, But you can go ahead.
My point was not so much that that it should be a law, because I don't believe that. I don't think that's fair. I think, people have the right to act nastily towards each other, because, how would I like it if someone decided one day that my conduct was nasty and decided to throw me in jail? Some people already do feel that way about me just because of who I am. Why would I want to extend that to opinions? So no, I don't believe in laws enforcing pronouns. However, I would say don't trivialize it, because trans people's identities are constantly under attack, from places like, from tabloids, from the YouTube right, from all sorts of sources, even from their own parents sometimes, because their parents have a set of ideals, a set of expectations for their children, and these expectations can be are very threatened when someone comes out as trans. And so the parent often has a tendency to react very hostily, even throw their child into the street. And so when you disrespect someone as identity like that, it can feel, it's just another, he seems to have gone, but I'm sure he'll find his way back in. So it feels like such an attack. It feels like such a, it feels like you're chipping away at who someone is, and it's just a really nasty thing to do. Are you all right there, S-Man?
Hello?
Kind of phased out for a bit. Yeah. Anyway, so I was
sorry. You literally cut out the last bit you were talking about from being thrown out on the streets. I'm sorry. The hangout lagged and it froze, and
okay.
It made a very funny face. But nonetheless, you if you don't mind repeating what you said, you can go.
Okay, so when you disrespect someone's pronouns, it is kind of it is a bad thing, because you're undermining an identity that already has to suffer so many attacks, and it's such an easy thing to do. It's such a a small courtesy that you can make towards someone, that it just seems like such a nasty choice to make if you're just going to, misgender for no good reason.
Well, yeah, and here's the thing, right? I've been, thinking about the whole treatment of trans people. Now, I don't mean to trivialize. If it sounds like I'm trivializing, I don't mean to do so. I mean that genuinely.
Mm-hmm.
However, I will say that on the issue of like, these parents, like they just have an aneurysm about their kid coming out as trans and throwing them out on the streets. In my opinion, that should be against the law to throw your kid out on the streets. Period. I mean, unless they're emancipated, that's the term, emancipated. Unless that's the case,
Mm-hmm.
until they're 18, you have a responsibility. Until they are 18, you still have to discharge the duties you signed up for by by having a family. Mm-hmm. Now, I will say that with LGBT people, whether it's sexual orientation or being transgender, I do not agree with. I used to misgender Riley Dennis and Mila Stewart all the time, and it wasn't out of like, oh, I hate trans people. It was just to spite people, like, But now it's like,
but like when you do that sort of thing, like the way you really think about a certain minority group is how you treat the worst members of that group. You don't see me going around calling Candace Owens racial slurs just because I dislike her. No, I treat her with respect, even though I consider her opinions terrible. I just target her opinions and her, her asshole attitude, not her identity. And I think, Very Dead Horse says that he'll, Brandon and Misgender said they'll misgender the shit out of Zinnia Jones and Riley Dennis. But like, then, people will always feel on edge with you because they'll never be certain, when will I lose the common human decency from this person? When will I go a step too far and they will have an excuse to attack who I am as a person? Like it always makes you unsure of where that person stands if you don't say no. Just respect the person for who they, just respect their identity. Don't go after because there's nothing wrong with being trans and there's nothing wrong with being all sorts of different marginalized groups. So don't attack that sort of thing. Just attack them for their stupidity and their bad opinions. I don't like Zinnia Jones. I think I found her tweet, "Fuck the white working class," atrocious because I have love for every member of the working class. And she in general on Twitter, she's a bit of a disgrace. And she said, I would pilot the drone myself. That's terrible. But I'm still going to call Zinnia Jones she. I'm still going to respect her identity. I'm still going to say, no matter how bad a person you are, I have basic respect for your identity. I have basic respect for who you are as a human being. And your identity is not conditional on, how I'm feeling. Yeah. Riley,
let me explain.
Okay, go ahead. I was just addressing. Go ahead.
The reason, like what I'm saying is, it was literally only to spite people. Like if I thought someone was if I met a trans person who just made me want to like take my a screwdriver out of my toolbox and ram it in my trachea, I wouldn't misgender that person because I'm mad at them or I think they're an absolute cunt. It would be only to spite them when they would be demanding respect for the pronouns. However, after thinking about it for a while, I could see how it would come off as hateful, and I decided, I can find a way to make a jab at somebody's expense without having to make calling them I never did call. I used to call people trannies, but I've seen that word as like, you know what? I'm not going to say it. I'm not giving any power, or I'm not trying to revive. I mean, you can say reclaim if you want to reclaim the word. That's totally that to me. That's your business, not mine. But I would just see the word as like, let's not use the word. If you want to, cool. I'm not going to police you about it. But my reasoning was just like to spite people, and mainly to spite Owen because he would quote my tweet being all, and this was like over a year ago now. He'd be like, "Ass man, you're transphobic," and it would just make me laugh. So I did it literally just to spite him. And I know it seems childish and everything, but when you have someone constantly breathing down your neck for every word you say, and I'm fine with criticism, but at some point I just can't help but laugh.
Mm.
And laughter is the best medicine, especially when it's someone who annoys you daily or annoys you sometimes. And coming back to also to treating people with respect. Now, whether you call it respect or politeness, when it comes to Zinnia Jones, at this point, it's like I'll still call her a she. I didn't know any different when I first like. I'll admit, when I first saw Riley Dennis, I didn't know any different, so I actually referred to her as she at first, and then I went into the edgelord territory, which is very embarrassing to admit, but
Riley
it's
J. Dennis
evolution.
is doing her best to transition. It's just,
Yeah,
it's
well,
so silly. Like,
yeah.
you may disagree with Riley J. Dennis. I disagree with Blair White, but I don't strip her of her humanity. I still give her that, basic decency.
Yeah. This was before her. This was in
So
2016. To be just for open transparency.
So the Crusader says that Riley hates everyone who disagrees with her. It's true.
I don't buy that.
Well, I mean, I don't. I have no idea of knowing how, like, what's in the mind of Riley J. Dennis. I don't follow her on Twitter. I haven't really watched very many of her videos. I've disagreed with the ones I have watched to a certain extent, but I just, like, it's impossible to know. And even if it were true, do you really want to stoop to her level? Like,
yeah.
Why go down to the mud pit? Just critique her arguments. It's that easy.
Yeah. And it was also when, like, the reason I started to really heavily reflect on how, like, I would, like, my roasts towards people or how I'd be towards them was her video saying the truth about my transition. It was in either extremely late July or very early August. I can't even remember. But she made a 30-minute video, which I think I watched the whole thing, and it made me very heavily reflect about how I would, like, I've never spoken to Riley Dennis. I mean, me and her did have a small chat in one of her live stream chats.
I see.
But she deletes those streams after. But basically, I would just say it like, it made me reflect heavily. Like, I don't agree with the term transgender anymore, to be completely honest. I mean, is there sometimes a person who claims to be something and they don't actually believe in that, or they don't actually believe that's what they are? Maybe there is, but I think it's a very small minority. I think it's a very, like, fringe group. Like, like you can cite almost any example, and there's probably a few like that, like the extremely religious pro-choice group, or the extremely religious pro-life group, where they're just absolutely absurd. But it doesn't mean that we should treat every single person who might subscribe to the same ideology as bad, unless that ideology itself is inherently bad, like Nazism, or like putting pineapples in pizza. Don't generalize unless the ideology itself is a bad one. I mean, and even then, if you consider it bad, which sometimes could be up to it's subjective. Like for instance, when we were debating capitalism versus communism, I don't think of any single communist as a bad person. I might think the ideology is a laughable one, but I don't believe in mistreating you because of your communism or your socialism.
Well, I feel the same towards libertarians, unless they're fake libertarians who are actually fascists.
I'm a libertarian. Women shouldn't be involved in politics. Oh, God. Oh, God. Now my chest hurts for doing that. But, yeah, that was hilarious. Like, if that was a live stream, you'd be like, is this dude a Poe? Is this dude a Poe for real? Oh, I'm a libertarian, everybody, but women should be involved in politics, and I'm going to blame everything on the Jews. It's like, oh my God, it was a disaster. I'm like, I wish this was a live stream so we can all mock him for the stupidity he was saying. And then on my other stream yesterday, he's all, I'm not anti-Semitic, but he went on titles about the Jews. I'm just like
he repeatedly puts academia in brackets. He puts neoconservative in brackets. Like, everything he doesn't like is Jewish, and yet I'm not anti-Semitic. He also called the Jews a subversive influence.
Oh my God! I mean, I cannot imagine. I can, like, it'd be so hilarious. I wish I could just make this true. If we could have, every time someone hates an entire group of people, like they do some test or something, and they're like, "Oh, hey, Richard Spencer, turns out you're a quarter African American. oh, hey, Frederick Voltaire Bastiat. Turns out you're actually half Jewish or half Ashkenazi Jewish. Oh, oh my God, it would be so great. Or I know this one, and I don't know if any commie would wish this on their worst enemy. Be like, oh, hey, Owen. As it turns out, you're actually related to Milton Friedman.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, Lapis. As it turns out, Ayn Rand is your great grandmother or something. I don't know.
Karl Marx is your great grandfather, S-Man.
You just see me like go on some rampage or something, and I'm like, where's his grave? Because Aircraft Sparky one time joked that he took a shit on Karl Marx's grave, and I'm like, I joke about doing that, but that just I don't know. Unless he was like a genocidal dictator, I'm not gonna desecrate his grave. I mean, you'd have to really do something messed up to either me or to someone I know, or just in general for me to want to do that.
Yeah. Oh, looks like S-Man's gone again, but I'm still here. This live stream has been a bit finicky. I don't really know why, but c'est la vie.
Google Hangouts is
okay.
Google Hangouts. Yeah, Google Hangouts just went ape shit on me and just like dropped me. So yes, everybody, Google Hangouts is as useful as a vegan on the grill today. But as I was saying, I think I do not accept for a second anyone who says, "Oh, I killed this person because I panicked because they were gay or something." To me, that is not an excuse.
Oh, I was startled.
It's like, oh, I panicked that I found out I'm now a father.
Yeah, it's
yeah. Oh, I was startled. I found out I got a girl pregnant, so I attacked. Doesn't matter. The fact you killed somebody in a supposed panic doesn't matter. Like, only a few exceptions would I ever make when I did this out of panic. Like, let's say for a second manslaughter. Like, let's say for instance, you have you're at a shooting range, for instance, and let's say I tapped you on the shoulder and you just panicked because you were you were able to jump scare, and you accidentally turn around and you for some reason pulled the trigger and you put a cap in my head. You'd still be charged with manslaughter, and rightfully so, but you didn't do it out of malice. Now, in the case of, I will say this, that one reason I do not make, I used to make fun of, but I still feel bad now. I don't make fun of if anyone dates a trans man or a trans woman. I mean, I never necessarily made fun of it, but I'd make my snide remarks because I was a total cunt. But basically, it goes down like this. If, for instance, I used to say, oh, JJ likes trannies, but if JJ ever did date a trans woman, I would not make fun of him for it because I don't see there to be really anything to poke fun at. It's like, I don't think it's gay because a lot of the reactions I've seen from straight dudes, they like, for instance, when they're all like fanboying over Blair White and they're all making snide comments about her physical appearance, it seems to come off of a very heterosexual connotation. Gay dudes wouldn't touch Blair White with a 10-foot pole because
she's an asshole.
Well, that and the fact she's a shill. But I digress. Just the same as lesbians aren't going to touch a trans dude because they're not into the secondary sex characteristics he's going to have, and they're not attracted to dudes in general. As for whether, like, I've had people ask me whether or not I would date a trans woman, I honestly don't know. I used to say, oh, nope, never will, but at the same time, I'm like, I can't predict how I'll think in the future. Like, I used to staunchly say I would never grow facial hair, but it grew on me, both emotionally and literally. Yes, and it's like I can't really say necessarily what the future is going to hold. Some people might have thought, oh, I will never question my sexuality or gender identity. And well, I've never questioned my sexuality or gender identity. I know people who have, and I know quite a few, for instance, LGBT people in my school, and my reaction to them is the same as finding out that it's going to be overcast outside today. I don't make it a big deal, but I'm not disrespectful about it. For instance, go ahead.
I thought it was funny though how some people were like, "I'm not going to make a big deal out of this. I'm not going to make a big deal of it on the chat," and then complained about it happening. Like, it was so weird, that whole aircraft Sparky rant on Google it.
Google it.
Yeah, when she came out.
Like, she came out as bisexual,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, yeah, because her original YouTube bio, she was a total troll, looked into the politics she claimed to advocate for, and I think she believes in it now. I mean, I was like, dude, why do you care? Like, if you think it's so trivial, it's not that big of a deal. Why the fuck are you going on like a 30-minute rant about this? This is ridiculous.
And it was like, the new counterculture is heterosexual sex.
The face you made when you did that was just a meme and a half. But yeah, it's like, to me, when Google came out as bisexual, to me, whenever someone comes out, I'm very glad that they did, because I don't want people to feel like, oh, I have to live my life in a type of secrecy. Mm-hmm. I knew a dude who was closeted, like a closeted gay man.
Yeah.
And he never liked women, and people would stereotype him. He was not flamboyant. They'd say, oh, he's probably gay. And I think he even admitted so when he was drunk one time, but he pretended like he never said it. However, I wouldn't out him. I wouldn't say to his face out in public, are you gay? If I would ever ask a question that invasive, which I will never do, I would do it in private, because I think that is the correct thing to do. Like, I didn't know you were a trans person when I first met you. Mm-hmm. When you said you were, I was like, oh, okay. But I would have, like, if I thought you were, I would not have asked, like, on a live hangout. I would have asked when it was off air, or I would have asked in the live chat, this Google Hangout chat, not the live chat itself of the stream. Mm-hmm. I'm all for treating trans people how I want to be treated. I wouldn't want to be thrown off of a rooftop. I wouldn't want to be curb stomped to death and have my final moments of life be filled with terror. Yeah. So I'm not going to do the same to others, and I would advocate people to do the exact opposite. When my best friend came out in 2016, mm-hmm. my reaction wasn't, oh my God, you're a trap, or oh my God, you're going to force me to say your pronouns. My reaction was, okay. Hell, the guy never had to say to me, hey, can you refer to me as he, him? The minute he said it, I already knew what to do. Yeah. Not an expert on never come to be an expert on getting people's pronouns right, but he said he was a trans guy.
Well, I think what matters is if you make an honest effort. If you're trying, and I don't see anything wrong with making an honest mistake. Yeah. I've never been against someone who did that. But I kind of want to get back to the question of non-binary gender. So what would you say is your main objection to believing that there are more than two genders?
I wouldn't necessarily say there's an objection. I mean, there used to be, but not anymore. But the objection was I don't even know if I'd say hypocrisy or cognitive dissonance or oversight. But when people would say to me, oh yes, there's multiple genders, like non-binary, for instance, but they'd say, yeah, there's biological sex that factors in, they would say biological, like they would say, no, I'm not male or female, which male or female is biological sexes. And that is something they also would say, yes, those are biological sexes. And the problem is, it's either semantics or a huge lack of clarification. That would probably be my objection, rather than just necessarily believing there's more than two genders. I don't really object to it anymore. I would just say, if you're telling me that there's more than two or only two, I would ask to be concise with what terms you're using, biological sex or gender. And people get those mixed up a lot. And that was a problem that I had with Owen, because of the lack of translation and communication. Okay. You
don't necessarily have anything against saying that there are more than two genders.
I don't have anything against it. It's just not something I back. Like, it's not. I don't hate anyone who identifies as non-binary. I want to make that very clear. Yeah, no, I think I made it clear from the beginning.
You did make it very clear, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, I just get anxiety over people who might take it out of context or whatever. But yeah, and here's another thing. when we're talking about male or female, and I believe those are biological sexes, if you ask, like, I remember meeting this very nice woman, or female, whatever you want to call her. She said, if you ask me what my gender is, I'm going to say gender fluid. If you ask me what I say, female. And the interesting thing is,
oh, again, why is Google Hangouts so finicky? It's quite tiresome. I wish it would behave a bit better, because it's being quite naughty. Okay, S-Men, are you back?
goddamn live stream.
Why is Google Hangouts being so finicky today? I don't know why it's being so like completely naughty. Like it doesn't seem to want to respect anything.
Google Hangouts is very bigoted. It needs to check its privilege.
I wouldn't. Definitely.
Yeah. I don't know where it cut me off. So can you, if you don't mind, where did I cut off? Where did Google Hangouts cut me off?
You were talking about how the woman who identifies as you're talking about the woman who identifies as
gender fluid.
Gender fluid, but she's gender fluid, but she will say that her biological sex is female.
Yeah. Okay. So I found it rather intriguing that the terms would be used interchangeably. That is what I find intriguing. I'm not a grammar fascist, probably a little, but not too much. Where if you she would use the terms man and male, man a gender, woman a gender, male a biological sex, and female a biological sex interchangeably, like with all of them, So while I'm not going to read in someone's mentions or at their face saying you use those terms interchangeably, I would just point. I might point it out respectfully, being like, are those terms meant to be? Do you intentionally use it interchangeably, or is this just a small discrepancy? I think this is the final time the Hangout will glitch on me, but
okay. The very dead horse says there are no visual cues for any of the other genders. Pronouns are shorthand when you're referring to someone. Usually that person is someone you don't know. So those are my issues. Okay. Well, I mean, all of this is based on visual cues after all. Well, I mean, I don't know. I call S-Man a he when I'm talking about him, with other people. And I find him
how rude.
I find him to be,
I'm kidding.
A wonderful person to talk about, even though I'd say that we're fairly close in terms of friendship. And I'd say that there are visual cues for some of the other genders. Like I'd say there are people who look very androgynous and don't really appear to be any clear, distinct version of gender at all. I could find you quite a few images of people who I can honestly not tell, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think androgyny is.
I have no problem with androgynous people. In fact, my friend, which he's been on my live stream, so I don't have a problem using his first name, Kai. I remember one time we were having a conversation about him wanting to transition, and he would say that he would kill to be androgynous. And it's like when I was a little kid, I wanted to be androgynous, not because my gender identity, but because I did not like the idea of growing facial hair because it sounded like it'd be impossible to take care of. Now, when it comes to visual cues, I have met people who have come up with an idea. This was on Instagram, and I've met people who've tried this on Instagram. Would be that a bracelet or a ring or a style of clothing or a certain type of makeup, like if you're like for gender fluid people, for instance, if you're a guy for today or for the week or the year or the month or whatever, you will wear this certain type of color of lipstick or this certain type of color of shirt or ring or what have you. They'll do something that will indicate it.
And you are blocked.
Who?
Aircraft Sparky. No loss.
Bro, Owen's not a fucking pedophile.
That's why I blocked him. That's why I blocked him.
You blocked his Twitter?
I blocked him on Twitter, and that's why he's no longer in the group. And I blocked him here when he's going to keep coming around telling lies about my friends.
Yeah, like, Owen's not a pedophile. Like, look, I understand he insulted your brothers and sisters in the military. I get that. I don't agree with him calling them all terrorists. I thought he was a fucking idiot for doing so. But that doesn't justify you slandering him. He's staunchly against it. He said that he thinks it's disgusting. Like, when we were debating capital punishment, he said he found pedophilia to be disgusting, but he felt like that wasn't a justification to put them on death row. Now, he doesn't see. When did he ever say, Sparky, that, oh yes, he defends ISIS? I mean, ISIS is obviously in defense. There's no way to defend ISIS. Anyhow, but, like, do you have any proof that he thinks children are smashable or something? Until you do, it could be slanderous.
Well, he also threatened Owen with doxing by sending him to, telling Mr. Medicare to go after him. So, yeah, Aircraft Sparky can go away. I'm not interested in what he has to say. I'm not interested in his slander. I'm not interested in his doxing. He
even said, like, his foreign policy with it's fine with invading countries for the resources, I thought was fucking crazy. Like, I'm just saying, if the United States was the size of Cuba, and Cuba was the size of the United States, and Cuba was like, you know what, let's invade the United States for their fidget spinners. I don't know. We
not like
yeah, and they modify these fidget spinners to be sharp edges to attack the enemies in very close proximity.
Mm-hmm.
That'd actually be pretty badass to have fidget spinners like that. But anyway, I don't think anyone would really like their own country being invaded and dominated and annexed, for their resources. There's just no justifying it, especially when you said you don't want the United States to be involved in other countries' shit. I say it should be the attitude of foreign policy should be survival of the fittest, but that is a different discussion for another time. Speaking of, like, when it comes to the obvious political differences, like, I have various political disagreements with pretty much anyone I talk to on here. It really depends on what the issue is. I disagree, I disagree with Zach on abortion and whether or not it should be legal. I think it's a contradiction to call yourself a libertarian but want abortion legally banned. I disagree with Humane on anarcho-capitalism, as I'm not assured that it is going
workable.
I'm too hesitant to buy into anarcho-capitalism. And if I ever become one, I would actually write an entire script justifying it, just to think about it and treat it as if I'm not an ANCAP and read over it and see if it makes sense, And here's the thing with political spectrums, which I'll just mention this briefly before we get back to the topic at hand. No side of the spectrum should have all the answers. That's all I have to say there. Anyhow, back to the discussion. The cues, like I mentioned, like the example, like if you wear a certain type of clothing or you do something to try and keep the giant fidget. JJ, no. No. Just no.
You were the
Bad
one that
JJ.
approved the comment. That wasn't me. Anywho.
He didn't actually. The comment wasn't held for review. Anyway,
It was
I think it was another moderator.
Maybe.
It was a moderator.
Okay.
Anyway, but I will say that there's sometimes you could make a physical cue if there's not one. Like if non-binary people don't have a physical cue, but they can create their own.
Mm-hmm.
The hangout cut you off for a second.
Yeah, with as regard to creating a physical cue, just kind of they're they just, most non-binary people will tell you, and I kind of consider it polite to ask, when I meet someone, how do you want to be called? What do you want from me? I think it's just kind of a great workable system, and it kind of makes sure that there's no pressure or stress. You just, okay, got it. That's what you want to be called. Great. Mm-hmm. And then we move on from there. So it doesn't really seem like you have very much problems with non-binary genders. so long as they differentiate between biological sex and that they have a consistent definition of gender.
Well, there's also one other thing I almost forgot to mention, and as you were saying that, you just reminded me inadvertently, is to make sure there's a clear difference between the genders themselves. Because this was something me and Owen were talking about, is what's the point of creating all those genders if some are never going to be, like, some people will never identify as that gender. We were talking about in the context of, like, I brought that up, and he says, well, there's always space for more. Well, so we can have 70 billion genders, more than 10 times the human population of the planet. There's going to be billions upon billions that are not going to be actually identified or claimed.
Yeah, but I don't think that people will get to that point.
I'm just saying if it's infinite. I mean,
there's technically an infinite variety of positions on the spectrum between man and woman, and how you relate to that spectrum, and saying, no, I don't agree with that spectrum, or whatever. Technically, there's all those positions. It was just the distinctions between some of those positions would be so tiny that it would be kind of pointless to create a gender for it, or realize a gender for it. Honestly, I'll just take these genders, as they come. See if they're describing something that can be observed, and then treat people how they wish to be treated.
Mm-hmm. And there's also Lonely Wolf, who he mentioned, he talked about whether he was non-binary or not, and he said he wasn't, but he was talking about how an alphabet soup, it was going to be counterproductive, not harmful, but rather counterproductive, and I have to agree with the sentiment that I don't think the public is ever going to get used to the idea of an infinite number of genders. Maybe, like, if you introduce non-binary and gender fluid into the mix, then I think the public will get used to that rather quickly.
Mm-hmm.
One question I thought you were going to ask, which that's fine, was how would I react today to a non-binary person? Which, here's how I'll react. I won't freak out. If I was that petty and worrying about pronouns, or if I didn't know because it was an androgynous person, I would just use their name, or I'll give them a nickname. Like, if I didn't know to refer to you as she, her, I'd either say Lapis or Femi, or something like that.
Well, just ask, say, what are your pronouns, by the way? That's normally what I do when I meet someone, and they just tell me, and we're good. We move on from there. But anyway, A Very Dead Horse says, but there are multiple non-binary pronouns until you slip up, and then there's a lawsuit. Well,
I'd argue that lawsuits would be unconstitutional anyway.
Yeah, well, it depends. Like, if you're going around harassing this trans woman, be like, you're a male, you're a male, you're a male, every time you see them, every time they come in from work, and constantly follow them down the street yelling that, yeah, that's harassment. But if it's just like you made a mistake once, or you don't agree with trans people, or the science behind transgenderism, I think, well, you're being silly and you're wrong, but you have the right to be silly and wrong. And I'm not going to sue you. I don't think you should be able to sue people for being silly and wrong.
Yeah.
And as for the multiple non-binary pronouns, there are the neo pronouns, the z's and the zers. But honestly, I mostly see people using they. Like, I've met maybe one person online who uses z's or zim. Like, it's quite rare.
I've encountered only one person. Like, I've only encountered one person that ever went with Z or zim. And here's another thing. The reason I keep saying those lawsuits would be unconstitutional, well, maybe not necessarily lawsuits, but the fines would be, because they'd be excessive over a trivial thing. Like, I'm not saying misgendering is trivial, but I'm not saying it's like as bad as like
it's
a
not
Holocaust. It's not a hate crime, yeah. Is excessive fines. Like, $250,000 I see as excessive and therefore unconstitutional, as the 8th Amendment says excessive fines are a no-go. Cruel and unusual punishment is a no-go. And so I don't necessarily have the problem with the idea that there's more than two. I just don't, I don't passively reject it. I'm just saying, I don't really buy into it, but
like, why not buy into it?
Yeah.
Like, why not buy into it?
I'm not saying I'm not convinced of the genuinity of it. I just don't know how to explain it necessarily. That it's I really all that much bought into. But when I first heard it was, my attitude was I don't buy into it, but that is something I can only leave up to you. Like if you identify as non-binary, that's something I just leave up to you.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm not trying to say, oh, I'm totally 100% neutral. Well, I mean, I am at this point in time, but it is that I want people, because if you don't realize this, which I hope you do, is there's a total huge hypocrisy with the extreme fringe of YouTube who make all these fucking only two gender videos. If you think there are, treat it as if it doesn't exist. I don't make videos about Bigfoot because I don't think Bigfoot exists. Let's hold the same logic if we think there's only two genders.
Well, because, although you're kind of misrepresenting why they do it because it's this fun thing to do in the culture war, because apparently liberal America believes that there are more than two genders, and like I don't know, I consider believing in more than two genders kind of the far social left interpretation of gender and its experience, mm-hmm. and not really accepted by most people. But it's just that you don't really seem to have any sort of strong reason to not accept non-binary genders. So why not? I would want to address what the Very Dead Horse is saying. Actually, I might invite them on because they have so much to say and they seem to be quite passionate about this. It also has a lot to do with specific words for specific people. Mm-hmm. If I have to use a word that I don't use for anyone else, I know it will get complicated. Also, there's the fact that those people change them at a whim. Hell, I've been misgendered. Well, I mean, I'm assuming that you're cis, and that's not a bad thing. I'm totally fine with cis people. Almost all my friends are cis. I love cis people. It's just that your gender identity is not really under attack. It's not subjected to the same sort of social scrutiny and discrimination and rejection by large segments of society. And so being misgendered is not necessarily such a bad thing when it comes to you. And I will never misgender you. But I'm just saying that's why when you're misgendered, it may not feel like such a big thing. But when other people are misgendered, it does feel like a big thing. And I'm not even one of those people who really gets especially angry when people misgender me. Because I think, mm-hmm. Why am I letting this bigot define my gender identity? I can be braver than anything this person throws at me. Call me all your nasty names, throw everything you've got at me. I don't care. I'll still be standing when you're done. I'll still be a woman no matter what you say.
Yes. Also, one time I did misgender you, but only one time, and you were in the hangout, but I quickly corrected it. I didn't make a big deal out of it. Mm-hmm. That's my recommendation for everybody. Don't treat yourself as if you are a criminal because you did it, but just quickly correct yourself. It's not that big a deal. Mm-hmm. When I misgendered my friend Kai, when I accidentally said she instead of he, I pretended as if I stuttered. And he said, "Did you call me she?" He was more in "Did you call me she?" Because he wasn't sure what I was saying because I sounded like I was incoherent like Jocelyn. I said, "No, I just stuttered," and just play it off as if you stuttered, and or if you they're not going to buy into that, just be upfront about it. It's not that big a deal. Mm-hmm. Aircraft Sparky says gender and biological sex are the same thing. Well,
I blocked him. Why is he gone? Just why don't you kick him? Oh, he's so uninteresting as a person.
I don't know. Just time him out. I'll say this: if we're going off of strictly definitions and the synonyms, you could say that. Just saying, you could. But at this point, the topic, like I said earlier, I'm not very passionate about it like I used to. Mm-hmm. And the reason was that if you would have seen me and Owen's Twitter threads at the time, it would have looked like the Vietnam War. We went back and forth so many months, and then he said, "Debate time. Whoever wants to debate me, just let me know when." And I said, "Let's do this. Let's do this, Mac. You, me, in the ring over my alleged transphobia and the topic of gender itself, because I wanted to settle it once and for all."
Okay. Yeah. I just want to. Oh, okay. You've muted yourself. I wanted to bring it back once again to like what, like why, like you seem to mostly agree with me on this topic that you know there says a spectrum of gender, that it's not necessarily just one or you're the other, and everyone else is just pretending transgenders. And yet, for some reason, you don't seem to want to acknowledge that there are more than two genders. Like, to me, that's the confusing element of this conversation. And I think that there's nothing really wrong. Okay, goodbye, very dead horse. Yeah, yes, I'd love to talk to you about borders. I don't know when, but I will definitely talk to you. You've been quite polite on this chat, so yeah, I will talk to you then. But S-Man, I just want to address, you know, I don't understand why not accept? Like you seem like pretty much all in there except acknowledging it. And you've made some really great steps against kind of, you know, just the kind of view that most people in society have. And through your discussions with your friends and the other people that you know, you've come such a long way. And so it seems strange to me why you don't accept that there are more than two genders when you basically seem to already. Okay, you're back.
Yes. Sorry, I had a phone call. Anyway, I don't remember what I was saying because I have the memory span of a goldfish when it comes to remembering what I've said now. Oh God, now there's gonna be a war in the chat over whether or not.
Just block Aircraft Sparky. Don't.
No, it's over religion. I'm just gonna ignore him. Mm-hmm. I don't hate the guy. A little too rowdy for me.
Oh,
I guess. Yeah, I guess my edges have been smoothen over by, I guess, the various people I've chatted with. Mm-hmm. He said I'm just like Owen for thinking it's not that big of a deal if you punch a Nazi. I mean, if you're going to do it, I want you to define it clearly and only do your damage to that Nazi in particular and leave it to just that. Mm-hmm. But that's anyhow. Yeah,
that's a separate debate, and I think we both agree. You know, don't go after people who like obviously aren't Nazis, and you're just calling them Nazis because you can't argue with opposition unless you define them as literal fascists. Yeah, that's stupid. But at the same time, you do have to. You know, I'm glad that you recognize that action needs to be taken against fascists. They're not like some passive, casual threat. You know, like they're not just some annoying people online. They're killing people. You know, they're like terrorists.
I would, if I could. There was actually a motion in Illinois to declare fascists, white supremacists, Nazis as terrorist groups. Don't remember what happened to it because it was in August of last year, but I wish it passed. I don't remember if it did. If I was the governor, I would sign a proclamation declaring that, or have the Department of the State or whatever, some organization that has the legal authority to do so. Mm-hmm. But anyhow, basically the whole semantics thing was, I guess, my reasoning for not buying into the multiple genders thing. But like the reason I seem as like, I don't know if I sound uninterested. I'm not uninterested, but I just don't see the whole passion behind it, I guess.
Well, I mean, the passion behind it is that there are people in society who are daring to step out of these kind of rigid binaries, and that they're daring to explore their agenda in new ways and to find new paths for themselves. And they're fighting like a lot of bigotry and a lot of hatred. And I'm glad that you have, decided to step away from that and see, my role, even though it was limited, was wrong in spreading that sort of thing. But at the same time, like, I just don't see any reason why, just say, like, just support them. There's no reason to dance around it. You don't really seem to have any strong.
Well, I'm not dancing around it. I mean, I try not to have a strong take on something.
Mm-hmm.
It's just if I have a take on it, then it's just how it is. I don't try to make it strong or weak or halfway or whatever. But I will support anybody who is unjustly treated and not for a good reason. Like if you are a trans person, you're not hurting anybody by being trans.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's messing with you, let's go deal with that person, or if they're harassing you, making you feel unsafe, let's find a way to deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a white supremacist and someone knocked your teeth out because you called them the N-word in public, you quite frankly deserve that punch in the face. And I hope,
like you're just going around spreading violence. You're trying to intimidate people with your actions. Like you're kind of bringing up yourself.
Yeah, I actually debated whether or not racial slurs was an act of violence one time, and that debate was actually a whole lot of fun, considering that Owen could feel my pain quite a while later when he was having a debate of his own where the interruptions were over 9,000. But I will say that coming back to something you mentioned earlier about how you express your own identity, how you have to do it as male outside, but inside you are left to your own devices. You do it how you see fit. Mm-hmm. And I actually want to address that point you mentioned earlier because it is something it's an opinion that's evolved from quite a long time. Okay. That with how to treat kids who come out as trans.
Yeah.
To me, that is very important on how you go about it. Mm-hmm. Instead of going with a loud, angry approach, is to go with a subtle one. For instance, if my kid at age 5 is questioning their gender, I would find a way to, if they're questioning it, I would ask like very non-invasive questions, like ask them to be more specific or something like, if I had a little boy, if he was like, I don't know, my son, and he's like wants to dress as a girl. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a woman when he's older, but I would go about it in a very cautious way, and I want people to do so because, when they talk about they came out as trans like years later, and they're like, my parents were very unhelpful with how they treated that. Mm. But yeah, it's like, and there's also how to treat people like you see in public, and how you treat people who, I don't know how I was going to go about saying it, but the reason I made sure to, when I first heard of trans people, there was one reason I always wanted to make sure I would interact with trans people, is so that I would never ever hate a trans person for being trans. Because if you know someone that's a part of a group that's not inherently bad, it's hard to hate the person. Like, I can't hate gay people because I know very many gay people who are very nice people. And even if I didn't, I can't hate a group of people that don't hurt anybody. That's why I don't hate non-binary people. And when when we're talking about lack of hate crime laws on non-binary people, they are actually protected under the law the same way I am as a mostly white cis straight man. If I walked up to a non-binary person and I John F. Kennedy'd them, I'm going to prison probably for the rest of my life for aggravated murder.
Yeah.
If I went up to a cisgender white straight most privileged man in the world and I shot him in the face, I'm still going to prison for the rest of my life, and I could even get a death sentence because of aggravating factors depending on the state I'm in. But that depends on the state you're in or the nation you're in or whatever. I would say, like, I'm not dancing around whether or not to support. To me, I don't want to declare support for any specific group because it sounds too limiting. I just want to support people for being a person. The fact you are alive makes me want to say, if someone's mistreating you, and you're not doing anything to deserve it, let's get you out of that fix you're in, and let's get you moving forward. Like, I don't really care if you're non-binary. I don't care if you're rich. I don't care if you're poor. I don't care if you're gay or straight or what class you are. I don't care your political ideology. I mean, if you're a Nazi, then I could care less about you. But
because your political ideology is to attack other people.
Yes, and the problem with fascists is they have legs, but they just don't see the ability to move forward. Mm-hmm. So as long as you're a good person, to me, like, that's all it takes for me to say, I want you to live, I want you to have a fruitful life. Like, I don't really care. Like, your identity or political leanings means nothing to me. You know, like, I don't see it as mattering. You know.
Yeah.
I know it sounds very humanist or whatever, or egalitarian. That's fine if it is. I don't have a problem with being labeled that. But it's just the fact that I was just raised, treat others how you want to be treated. That was what my parents instilled for me since day one, and that was probably one of the best pieces of advice I've gotten from them this far. I don't know how you were brought about it, but it looks like you may have been brought up. Your parents may have brought you up the same way.
Well, I love my parents, but the question of non-binary identities and whether you support them is an important one, because non-binary people are desperately short of allies on YouTube, and so having someone, especially a right-wing person, say, like, I remember the reaction when what's her face? Oh God, Shoe on Head said, I believe non-binary genders are a thing. I support you. There was a huge negative reaction from a lot of her audience, but for trans people, like for non-binary people, that was a big landmark for a lot of them, because for the first time, it felt like they were finally getting social acceptance in more centrist circles. And even if you don't necessarily agree with, every like single thing that non-binary people say, and I don't agree with every single gender that you can find on Tumblr. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't say, you know what, there are more than two genders. I support you. Like it's just, I don't know. And I think it's kind of interesting how you can see these multiple genders as different societies define them. One of the ones that I like the best, let's see, where was it here? Oh God, I have so many links, so much research. Where are you?
I'm right here. I don't know about where you are, but I'm right here.
Here we go. Yes.
Okay.
This is a map done by PBS of all the different genders from different cultures from all around the world. And you can see that there's quite a great diversity of, some of them represent more kind of like just this culture's take on trans people, but a lot of, or gender nonconformity, but a lot of them, I would say, definitely can constitute a very different kind of gender identity. And it's I think very interesting. I do recommend that you go through this map and you see it, like just the amount of diversity that you can that there is when it comes to gender all over the world. And just how strange this idea is, that there is only two, when there's it's so prevalent. Like, if you look at gender as society, how society defines gender, so gender roles, there's societies all over the world that have more than two gender roles. If you look at gender as chromosomes, there's all sorts of people who have different chromosome combinations. If you look at gender as people who have a set of secondary sex characteristics, due to the advent of chemicals, proper chemical transition, people can experiment with that, mix and match, and become, and really truly express their gender identity in all sorts of different ways. If you just see it as fashion, you can explore in different ways. And Aircraft Sparky, I have to say, you're my least favorite gender.
His gender is drone strikes. Anyway, I don't know. I like that's rather interesting you bring it up. I mean, yeah, cultures, like, it's not surprising cultures are going to define things differently. Like, I expect that a lot. Whether we define temperature or how to measure speed or distance, yeah, there will be difference. And I've been thinking about it quite a bit as to should we define sex by chromosomes or secondary sex characteristics? Like I mentioned earlier, intersex is 1 in 1,500 to 2,000 people are born that way.
Yeah.
So it's a male or female, essentially, with a different style of, if you will, a chromosome. Sorry, the chat of chromosomes um, who, due to the circumstances I read to you earlier and to everyone, that that led to it going to that direction.
Yeah.
Now, when it comes to how different cultures define gender, I don't know. Like, this is something, like I said earlier, I've reflected a lot over the last long ass time.
Yeah.
About how to like my stance on it. I'll say that, you know what, define it how you want. Like, I'm not going to tell you a different. Like, if you believe you're agender or genderqueer or what have you.
Yeah.
I see it as your business. I see it as not something I'm not going to question. I mean, if you ask me straight up, do you think there's more than two genders, and I say no, I mean, if you're so sure it is, then it shouldn't hurt you if you don't think. I mean, if it does hurt you, then that's your prerogative, or that's how you react.
Well, like, if you're non-binary and you ask someone that, then they'll probably take it. It depends on the non-binary person, of course, but it's kind of like a rejection of their identity, right? It's like, oh, okay, I have to deal with this again. Great, this is what I deal with for pretty much everyone. You're just a transgender, and it's not your fault because you don't actually have those beliefs. But when most people who say there's only two genders, I don't think most of them are bigoted. I will say that, unfortunately, the worst elements are often seen, right? Like, it starts to turn into aggressive misgendering. It starts to turn into this kind of toxic culture of, are you a real trans person or not? It starts, or even to just like blatant transphobia, where it's like, oh, you're just faking it. You're some sort of weird communist for being trans.
Or you have a disease.
Yeah. Mental
there's actually something I want to bring up earlier. You wasn't trying to deliberately misrepresent why. Yeah, I wasn't trying to deliberately misrepresent why they make those two gender videos. They do it for the lulz. They do it because they. Now, the reason I mentioned, like, if you don't believe something is real, like, I make very few religious. If you think there's only two genders, why not treat the people you think their genders aren't valid? Why don't you treat them like they don't exist? Don't acknowledge them. Because these people, they seem so angry and so bitter when they talk about it, or there are these YouTube shills that talk about topics that were, the hot topic issue of the day 2 years ago because they have nothing better to do.
Yeah.
Cough, Misa. But anyway, like, so I wasn't trying to misrepresent. Like, I wasn't trying to deliberately misrepresent why they make those videos. Yeah. It's just if you think that's the case, act like you think that's the case. It seems like they don't think the way they don't act the way they think.
Because it's the idea that there are more than two genders is a very threatening idea for people, because it's very comforting to believe that we live in a world where there are two choices and everything's already set down on you in life, and the inequalities and imbalances we see in life, no, these are just the results of nature. Everything must be this one way. If you're a woman, you're submissive. If you're a man, you're dominant. And if you try to break out of this mold, why are you not conforming? Why are you breaking out of this pattern? Everyone's much happier if we just agree to follow this certain set of ideas. That's a similar thing about gender. It's even a more radical challenge than to say, no, I'm not going to conform to my gender role, to say, I reject your gender completely. I reject what you have called me ever since, I was assigned a gender at birth, and, say, no, this is my identity. This is who I am. These are the changes I'm going to make to my body to make it who I want to be. And this is how I'm going to live my life. That's a very terrifying idea to people who want society to work like a well-oiled machine and not to have these spurts of individuality and these acts of rebellion against what they see as a natural order, a natural hierarchy.
I will say that, going with the analogy of whether a woman's being dominant or submissive, it is interesting to mention, like, when it comes to society. There's one point I really want to address, but it just slipped my mind, but I'll get back to that in a sec.
Sure.
Because it really was something I didn't think we would cover, but so when it comes to the dominant or submissive, I mean, I do think society is progressing towards being more accepting with the whole gender thing, because
Yeah.
California, which isn't shocking to be honest, California and the state of Oregon, and I think even the state of Illinois, I think at least California and Oregon do recognize third genders.
Yes.
Now, honestly, if someone said to me tomorrow, third genders will be a third gender at least, or multiple genders, or what have you, will be legally recognized across the world, I'm not going to care. Like, because
Yeah.
here's and I know you seem to get, I know you seem a little annoyed that I'm not all that decisive on to support it or not. It's rather because I see it as none of my business.
Well,
The reason
yeah,
I'm yeah,
but there's things that are like none of your business, like being gay, which you can still say, yeah, I support gay people, you know. And it's a similar thing with non-binary. And the only reason I'm so insistent is, well, the situation is so desperate, and you know, there's so much of people who dedicate pretty much their whole YouTube career to bashing non-binary people and people who don't conform to gender norms. And the reason I think with the whole third gender thing, like, it may not be a big deal for you, but for people like non-binary people, it may be a very big deal, because imagine like spending your whole life having the idea of your identity rejected by the very state that you inhabit and pay taxes to. Like, let's say atheism. You're not legally allowed, like, there's no legal definition of atheism. You can't say that on your census form. You have to say Christian of some sort. Like, how would that make you feel?
I honestly wouldn't care. I just sign Christian and leave it at that. And hell, I'll even get more specific. In some states, even though it's not legally enforceable, I would be barred from by the Constitution of several states, Pennsylvania and Arkansas and a few others, from holding public office for rejecting their spaghetti monster. Now, you know, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with being legally ineligible to hold public office in Pennsylvania and Arkansas for rejecting their Sky Daddy. I don't see a big deal with it. If you do want to fight those laws, which they have been, and they've been, I think they were declared unconstitutional.
Well, I mean,
then
like freedom
go for it. And
also
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I do get why you're it's why you're insistent on it. Like, I'm not saying, oh, why are you being insistent on it? I get that, and I do respect that you are insistent on it. And here's the thing, right? As the day goes on, even though personally I'm still not all that convinced that there's more than two, I would be totally fine with it being, with society going in the opposite direction, saying, no, there's more than two, because even though I don't personally agree with it, like, you can personally disagree with something, but still go against your personal conviction to do what you may see as right, or do what you think is for the better of society. And I can name a very, very specific example of someone who went against his moral conviction to do what he thought was right, even though he personally didn't like it. Jimmy Carter, he's personally pro-life, and he said it was hard to enforce Roe v. Wade, but he saw that he cannot put his moral convictions before the law.
Yeah.
And, you know, even though I might, if I do change my mind, and you can take that W until it's the end of time, but if I do change my mind, then I change my mind. If I don't, I will still just call for people. Like, since I was born, I've called for people to treat each other how they want to be treated.
Yes.
If you wouldn't like your identity being attacked, then don't attack other people's identity. Even if you think it's bullshit, even if you think it is, you shouldn't care. Like, to me, it is a first world problem if you freak out, or if you react in an angry way to someone claiming to be of a different gender. The same goes for people, like, if someone comes out as gay and you don't think that's a real thing. You know, if it doesn't affect you, then you shouldn't care. I mean, but if it does affect someone you do know, you should care. And there's also, you know, like, you did see me get quite defensive at Humane when he was saying, and even Aircraft Sparky on my stream yesterday, when Aircraft Sparky was saying that in the eyes of God, gay sex does nothing, and it's like, it does something for him if he's caring about it all that much. He says in the chat, Gender nonconformist is a common thing. Even the APA DSM-5 is defined as normal. Then he says being a gender nonconformist is not considered a mental disorder or illness. I thought he would have said the opposite. He says it is not considered a mental disorder or illness.
Yeah. Well, I mean, gender nonconformity is, the first step on the road to this sort of line of thinking. And that's why I push for acceptability of that, as well as fighting for trans people, non-binary people, all people who fall under the umbrella of gender nonconformity.
Mm-hmm. And to be honest, I never did feel threatened. I just, when I heard about there being a possibility being more than two, I just thought it was rather funny and silly. But I do see why. I mean, I do see why Owen reacted the way he did when he would see my tweets where I'd mock Riley Dennis for the Adam's apple, or mock Milo Stewart. I almost said Dennis. Milo Stewart for some of the nuclear hot takes that even Hiroshima can't compete with. I can see why he reacted the way he did. Not saying it was necessary, that he wasn't being a little extra that day, but I see why he did. And I do like the fact that he does have that level of compassion for people, and I do too. But, I guess it's just a different way of philosophy, or a different way of principles. But like I mentioned earlier, I couldn't care less if you are of another gender or not. As long as you are a good person, that's all that matters for me to want you to be supported and defended.
Yeah, I agree with that message. It's just like part of the first step on the road for fighting for good people is to say, yeah, I support it. It's good to say, I want to treat all people with fairness, but it's like some people, when they hear that, will not necessarily think that you mean supporting the non-binary, or supporting gay people, or supporting all these other groups of people, or even supporting people who are already supported, mostly. They won't necessarily... Well,
there's my point, actually. Go ahead.
Yeah. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that by saying, yeah, I agree that there are more than two genders, I'm going to be an ally to non-binary people, you are, in effect, sticking by your principles of saying everyone should be treated equally and with fairness. And although, I think it's just hard for people who've never had to go through a gender crisis or a confusion of identity like that to understand, how stressful and how much rejection and how much hate people feel from that experience, and why it's important that if you do have compassion in your heart, if you do care for other people, that you do say, yeah, I'm an ally, as opposed to saying I just support all people. It's the difference between saying all lives matter and saying your life matters.
All right. The reason I say all people is because if I say I support non-binary people, but I still hold the view that there's more than two genders, I feel like I'm lying, and I can't do that.
Why do I don't get why you think that there are only two genders. You haven't given me.
Well, I did earlier when I mentioned there being a little connection when I said.
Oh, you mean between that particular intersex condition and...
not. I mean, I didn't mean that. I meant with the whole semantics of sex and gender. I felt like there was some tie there. But there was also...
Well, yeah, most people do identify with the gender that they were assigned at birth, but that doesn't mean that it's a fast rule. There is quite a bit of diversity in that regard. I'm not the point is
you just reminded me of what other point of
that they're not connected. It's just that there is variance, and so when you say that there are more than two genders, it's acknowledging that there is diversity on this subject, that there is seeing the world through kind of a prism, as opposed to just seeing one light,
or seeing that it's not necessarily black and white, but there's gray everywhere. Okay, so there was another point of contention that you just reminded me of, so thank you. It was the assigned gender at birth comment I get all the time. This again depends on your definition of gender, and the one I cited earlier, which I cite quite a bit. I don't see it as assigned. I mean, if you believe they're connected, like I think there is some connection, and maybe there is a variant. I don't know. I'm not an expert on this, but maybe there could be a variant. I mean, or hell, maybe they're referring to sex, but people are so it's like they don't have a problem using sex and gender interchangeably. So when the baby is born, and they're like, oh, that baby right there has a labia. It's a female, or it's a girl. Mm-hmm. I don't know how you. I'm going to presume, because again I'm very privileged, that you do hold a negative connotation of, and I say this with quotes, assigning a gender at birth. I mean, there's various attitudes. Some call it violence. Some say you really shouldn't do it, and some say it's just counterproductive. But
I think that it's better to just kind of raise the child and then let them decide where they fit on the spectrum, rather than saying, okay, I've decided that you're a boy, I'm going to buy you all the boy things. Just what your child shows interest in, get them that. Allow them to experience the diversity of the world, rather than saying, I'm going to raise you in this mold. The reason I have a problem with assigning genders at birth is because that's the mentality that leads to the intersex mutilation thing. Is when a doctor sees an intersex child and they're like, I'm a bit more girl than boy, so cut off all the parts that make that inconvenient. That's it. Like it provides the justification for that, and that's where I'd say it definitely becomes assigning. Like it's true that like 99 times out of 100, a person born with a vagina will end up identifying as a woman. Mm-hmm. Most people do identify with their assigned gender at birth. But that doesn't mean that you should discount the possibility that your child is trans and just raise them and allow them to experience life instead of trying to enforce them into a tiny box. That's, I guess, my point, is let them come to their own decision. Like if my parents, I think, had raised me as just kind of open, and then when I came to decide that I was a woman, they would have accepted me. Then my life would have been a lot easier than them having decided that I was a boy, and then tried to make me a boy, and then it not really working, and then me telling them that I'm a girl, and they're like, no, you're a boy, I don't want this. And so I'm like, okay, fine, guess I'll pretend, except in this room.
Yeah, so your parents are aware now, right? So I'm just...
Yes, they are, but they
I'm
don't.
sorry to hear that. Like, I'm sorry. I'm very sorry that you have to deal with that. But I would say, okay, like I said earlier, if I had the authority to do so, I would make that non-consensual surgery to intersex people against the law.
Yeah.
With assigning, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it's all that bad. However, it's not. I don't buy that it isn't. Like if someone says, "Yeah, let's do non-consensual surgeries to intersex people," to me that is not a justification to say we're going to harm this person's genitalia or their physical body. Mm-hmm. If they don't consent, then that's. And to me, doctors are breaking the Hippocratic Oath, and therefore their medical licenses should be revoked permanently. Aircraft Sparky in the chat says, gender is not assigned. It's simple. If you have a penis, you're male. A vagina, you're female.
But what if we're talking about some combination of both or neither? Like it can get quite complex, the diversity of genital conditions, which is why I do say assigned, because when it comes to those conditions, it really, it's so arbitrary that the doctor decides, okay, kind of more man, kind of more woman. And it seems kind of pointless. Like, why not just let the child grow up and then decide and then adapt their body to that and then support them, as opposed to deciding for them and then getting angry when your decision isn't equal to, when your decision isn't right.
The ultimate result. I don't really even think there's a justification. The only time I can ever imagine there being one is if there was some case where that condition of having both genitalia was going to cause like a medical problem. But I don't think that's very. I have to look into that further. But Sparky, if we're talking about like biological sex, when you say female and male, I would agree. If we're talking about gender, then maybe I would maybe side with Lapis here.
Mhm.
You know, I do think trans women are women and trans men are men.
Yeah.
Like, even if I didn't, I wouldn't be the annoying douche to be like,
well, you're not biologically male, so obviously
yeah.
it can't be a man.
Jesus Christ, that face though. Anyway, you do know how to make you do know how to make an S-man laugh. Sure, it exists in India, but not in the United States. Wait, what? Well, let me read this properly. Children are stupid. Okay, I need to read this for context. Gender is a synonym of biological sex. Gender roles are the only social construct. I do agree with that sentiment, but to an extent. Aircraft Sparky says children are stupid. That's why parents raise them. And I personally do agree that children are stupid, but maybe not for the reason you do. I think children are naive. I'm fine with them not being eligible to vote. I'm fine with children, with parents disciplining children. I do think children are stupid, but I do believe they get smarter over time. In the case of intersex, where they have both, Aircraft Sparky, that's so rare in the developed world. I'm gonna have to go back to the source I provided and see if they provide a statistic for that, and if they do, you can look at it when I post the link in the description. Sure, it exists in India, but not in the United States. Well, maybe not very often in the United States, but I wouldn't say not at all in the United States. Gender, and he puts in all caps, roles are the fluid thing. Personally, I do.
Why did you like rape the ears of everyone listening? Why did you do that?
Because my toxic masculinity demands it of me. Anyway, how bad was it? How bad could it have been? Besides, when you laugh out loud, you go to War Corpse quality audio, and it's just great. But how bad was my ear raping of everybody? Couldn't have been that bad. But children definitely get smarter with education and life experience, and I agree, and that's why with kids realizing they're trans, I won't say to them you're not trans, but I am very hesitant with them saying it, as I don't think they have the life experience. If you're 5 years old, I will be skeptical, because 5-year-olds do say a lot of things that they no longer agree with. When I was 5, I thought skirts and shorts were the same thing, and now I realize I was wrong. However, if I had a son or a daughter say, "Oh, I'm a trans boy or a trans girl," or they think that you get what I mean. Like, I would raise them in the same way that someone I've had YouTube drama with was raised. When her parents, who were Catholic, found out she was a trans girl, they said, "Okay, in the house, you can dress however you want." And she understood that in public, she couldn't really do that. But at home, it's anarchy, right? Yeah. The person, her name is Sophia Genimore, an actress who I made a response video to on the ethics of kids transitioning, who... the salt mine was just a gem. She left comments on my videos, which are still there, where she threatened my channel after I made two videos critiquing her position on on racism in society and whether or not kids transitioning is ethical or not. Let's see. Her YouTube name used to be Sophie Rainbows, but she changed it. So my two videos on her are still up. And I do remember, like, I didn't agree with everything Blair White said, but I was like, I could get where she's coming from, but I didn't necessarily agree with the entire video.
Which video?
Her video on kids, not like why she was against kids transitioning. I wouldn't be.
Like, she seemed to be like, well, you know, it makes them sterile, and that's why they shouldn't transition, even though it significantly improves their mental health. And my thought was, chemotherapy can potentially kill a child, but we still do it for children who have cancer. Like, does she really want to ban that just because, oh, it might have a negative side effect? Yeah, but it's designed, it's a treatment, you know. Sometimes treatments are imperfect. You know, that's the case with transition. It's an imperfect treatment to, you know, it's the issues that trans people face. And just because, you know, it's an imperfect instrument is not a good reason why trans people shouldn't transition. You know, it's sad that our transition stripped her of the ability to procreate and have children. I'm glad that the new technology enables me to actually have children, and I won't have to make the choices that that Blair White did, even though I really don't like her. Just because, like, she says trans people don't care about trans rights, and like, it's only her. Like, she's the only trans person I know who doesn't care about trans rights. Even conservative trans people seem to care about trans rights. But she's like, no, all trans people agree with me, but I'm against identity politics, though. Anyway, I just wanted to show this survey about how, you know, how likely trans people are. You know, trans and gender nonconforming people who are rejected by their family are nearly 3 times likely to experience homeless, 73 times more likely to be incarcerated, and 59% more likely to be attempted suicide. And 46% of trans men and 42% of trans women have attempted suicide. And I'm actually in that 42%. So I like, it's not like, there is a reason people transition as children, and like they're you know, it's sad when it goes wrong. Like I think it's like 2% of transitions don't work out, and that's sad. But it's better to avoid the whole, you know, all that trauma from having to be trapped in a body that isn't yours, rather than you know, maybe not being able to have kids.
Okay. Now, with the let me stop presenting. Okay, so when it comes to the cancer analogy, and this is something we did by another YouTuber who I had a video back and forth with. Obviously, there's a huge difference. I mean, not receiving hormones, that itself is not going to kill you. The suicidal ideation is, but the lack of hormones won't kill you itself. I will say that, you know,
well, if we like getting chemotherapy won't kill you. The cancer will eventually if you don't, or if you don't find some other treatment.
Yeah, and
it's a similar thing.
Well, I do see the analogy as I see the point you're making.
Yeah.
But I do see it as not the best analogy. But I will say that when it comes to how to treat trans children, if you're 5 and you say it, I can get why people would be skeptical about it because you were 5. Now, if you're like, I don't know, 16 or 17 and you said to me, I think my friend just said to me, I'm transgender, I'm more likely to believe you because you've had all that life experience, you know, in only 17 years, you've had at least enough life experience to get to know who you are. And teenagers are still trying to figure out who they are. You know, I can speak from personal experience. Some came out as bisexual. Some came out as transgender. Some came out as gay. You know, teenagers and young adults are still figuring out who they are. I would say that if you, I wouldn't give necessarily puberty blockers to a 5-year-old, but I would have no problem if it was either, if you said to me, give it to either a 5-year-old or a 17-year-old, I'm going with the 17-year-old. However, I would want to, like, obviously they do, it's not like they just give it out to you like a dispensary. Like, this is something they say, that, you know, like, this is something that they're like, are you sure this is how you want to go about it? I don't think it necessarily sterilizes you. Maybe a few cases, but I don't think it's as prevalent as Blair White was trying to argue it was. I will also say that, you know, when a relative of mine came out to me as bisexual, even though me and her argue we can't stand each other, I just said to her, she's all freaking out because she thinks that I'm going to hate her. I'm like, if I hate you because you're a terrible person to me, there's I'm just like, oh my, like she's just speaking to me like as if she's wanting my approval. I'm like, you hate my guts. Why the fuck do you want my approval? And she says she's bisexual, and I'm like, okay. I just said to her, I don't care that you're bisexual. I mean, I said to her, that's fine. I'm glad you're not you weren't afraid to tell me that.
Yeah.
I just said to her with a smile on my face, I still hate your guts, but I'm glad that you're comfortable with who you are as a person. I think like it was just funny. Like even she still laughed. Aircraft Sparky says puberty blockers given to a 17-year-old would be too late. All right. If we had extensive therapy on, I don't know, a 12-year-old or something, I don't know, and this was something like the doctors can say this is the correct case, maybe I think it'd be fine. I don't know. I've heard of 14 and 15-year-olds going on puberty blockers, and to me that I would say is fine. Or if you give testosterone blockers and estrogen, or just straight up testosterone, depending on the case, then I don't really care if you do it. I would just say therapy. Like, obviously, you have to do it, and I'm glad there is at least that protocol. But I don't know. Like, I was just very hesitant about the whole kids transitioning, because kids often don't have enough life experience to make a choice of that magnitude. And I'm not trying to use the word choice, but I don't know what other word you could use, but it's semantics. Aircraft Sparky has also said, but the reason why children are dumb is because they have nothing but feelings to go on. Now, to be fair, most don't actually figure out who they are until they're in their 29s. Okay, I think whatever. He says, so transitioning as a child is ridiculous. Puberty blockers should be considered child abuse.
Blah, blah, blah. We've heard this before. Is every risky treatment really child abuse?
I used to think it was in this case. I would say if you gave it to a 4 or 5-year-old, that is. But if you gave it to, I don't know, a 15 or 16-year-old, I would say that really comes down to, at that point, I think you would be informed enough to make a call of that magnitude. Like, I do genuinely believe you are a woman. You're a little older than me, by I guess around half a year or something. And I do believe, and even if I had 6 months over you, I would still believe that you are a woman. Same with my best friend. He's like 8 months younger than me. I still believe he's a man, and he's more manly than the people who call him a mangina, and and you're more womanly than the people that call you an effeminate degenerate because they have nothing better to do other than to claim you're a misogynist because you're a woman and they don't approve. I think everyone on the political spectrum can agree about hating TERFs. I'm interested in sharing this study because I find it so strange. This is from the Association for Psychological Science. So it indicates that gender identity of these children is deeply held. It's not a result of confusion or pretense. And that transgender children do seem to mainly be exactly how that they are as older people. That it is correct in their identity. I'm sure there is some variance. As I said, there's about 2% of people where transitioning doesn't work out, and there's about 10% of people where being in chemotherapy doesn't work out, but it's still a treatment people use for cancer. And it's sad when transition doesn't work out because you're losing a lot. But at the end of the day, like, if it works for so many people, and studies show that trans children do actually have a pretty consistent trans identity, why not? The thing I will say, though, is that this does contradict my experience. Like, my personal experience, I go against the grain. I did not know as a child that I was trans. I've met people who've been like that. My best friend, he was of that type where he found out when he was 5, and his family was sadly not. His family is not sadly. Sadly, what am I saying? Sadly, they're not too accepting. His mom is accepting, and she's a sweetheart for that. And basically, my idea is to just stomp out, not literally but figuratively, people who are just like, oh, your friend's a woman. I just, like, one time someone said to me, did you just call her a him? And I just looked at him and I just said, oh, no, that's a guy. And he's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, he's just a little effeminate. Calm down, calm down. Or say, oh, he's he just has a bit of of an effeminate side to him. It's all cool, bruh. It's all cool. As to whether or not he's degenerate, well, he likes The Walking Dead, so that answers that question. I'm sorry, Walking Dead fans, but that show is overrated, and I would much rather watch all of Jossaman's music, in quotes, videos on loop for about a good solid 3 weeks than watch that show. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, I would rather be bitten by a walker than watch a show where all you do is kill walkers and have drama in it. Sorry, not sorry. Problem... Aircraft Sparky says, problem is you're citing one study because it supports what you think. However, there's tons of studies that say children cannot make those decisions.
But he hasn't shared any of them. He just says that.
Sparky, you have my Twitter DMs are open to you, bruh. So if you do have any,
yeah, I
send them my way.
Although I would recommend blocking Aircraft Sparky because he just doxes people. Like, he threatens to dox people. He's just in general like, I don't make a habit of blocking people. Actually, Aircraft Sparky's the first person I've blocked in my entire career on Twitter. But if you're going to threaten to dox my friends and make false accusations of their pedophilia, I have very little sympathy for you.
I've blocked a few people, and I don't do it very often. Only time I block people is if they slander my character, and I think it's bad enough to where it might actually affect me personally. Never had to do that, but that's just a general rule. If you are spamming my mentions with just calling me insults and saying nasty shit to me, I don't have to put up with it. I hate that side of Twitter that's like, if you block someone, you can't be for free speech. It's like, you don't care about liberty, do you, or autonomy, because you're trying to dictate people's Twitter accounts.
Like, you literally, it's one of the most inconsistent and foolish positions anyone could possibly take. To say, I don't want to be messaged by this person is the same as a government suppressing someone's ability to speak, or even an institution suppressing someone's ability to speak.
Yeah, but the whole punching Nazis thing, I'm not against free speech, because it's not the government suppressing it. The Constitution of the United States is not to tell us what we can and can't do, it's to say what the government can and can't do.
Yeah, it's to defend against the encroachment of state tyranny.
You punching a fascist in their face and going totally Chris Brown on them, you're not taking away their right to say something.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to prevent them from, if you believe that that their rhetoric is going to get somebody killed. Aircraft Sparky, I hate to say this, did you have to stoop down to his level? And I don't care if he said all military members are terrorists. You know what? You could say all socialists. All socialists must be on acid 24/7. Like, oh my god, it's no big deal, bruh.
Mm. What? Okay, she can take it. Take it. Where is it? It's in my room.
Anyhow, but yeah, Sparky, I don't care if he called all your brothers and sisters terrorists. That doesn't matter. That's just semantics. Well, not semantics. It's not a big deal. Like, bruh, Sorry, the reason I muted you is I could hear what was being said, and that's not something I wanted to... that's not my business to hear.
Oh, Francis, Antifa is a joke. How does one respect a group that advocates violence to further a supposedly moral cause? Okay, so how do you respect any government? That's a group constantly advocating.
Government has.
Yeah, and Antifa is like what?
I don't respect the government.
Yeah, I don't respect the government either. But like, violence sometimes is necessary. Like in World War II, I think the Jews were completely justified in rising up in the concentration camps against their fascist oppressors. And I think it's totally justified for those same Jews to fight back against the Nazis who want to bring back that system. And, I think a lot of... Oh, go ahead.
But yeah, it's like, I largely agree with that. Like, the government, The government has committed a lot of violence. That's why I don't have a problem with protests. It's just the means of, or the way they approach it is the contention. Other than that, I'm fine with Antifa. I just don't like the way they go about it sometimes. Same with BLM. If the way they go about it. If you just protest and you don't hurt anybody else during your protest, I'm all for your protest. But the minute you start hurting innocent people because of the bad actions of other people, that's where I draw the line. Well, now, Aircraft Sparky also says, Owen calls all military members terrorists, but he supports actual pedos. That makes him a pedo. So if I support capital punishment, does that mean I'm actually practicing capital punishment?
There's no logic here. And like, he doesn't support terrorists. You just can't seem to understand that someone could dislike the US military and not support terrorists. Like, it's possible. And I think Owen went too far, for the record, with that. I think that it was unhelpful to his cause of raising awareness about the abuses of the US Army. And I'm not a fan of the US Army as an institution, but I don't think all military personnel are terrorists. I think they do genuinely think that they're fighting for a good cause. They're just very misguided. And then there are the like genuine war criminals, either like troops on the ground or like generals that order them to like firebomb, or like all the people behind the napalm campaign in Vietnam, I think, were war criminals. Like you're using chemical weapons.
With the My Lai.
Yeah, and that too.
And I think the My Lai massacre was a definite war crime. There was war crimes on both sides during World War II. There were sexual crimes happening by members of the United States military, and then there were some that were committed on the other side. The bombing of Pearl Harbor crime. I don't think us bombing Japan was a war crime. I think I do believe it is justifiable what Harry Truman did. I don't like the Truman Doctrine because that led us to the Vietnam War, and I don't like that it was continued under Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon, and ended under Ford. I do think that the Truman Doctrine, while I can sympathize with why they thought it was a good idea, it just didn't work out in the end. The bombing of Pearl Harbor effectively marked the end of non-interventionist foreign policy. Mm-hmm. It was strong at the time, and then it's done.
Yeah.
So Aircraft Sparky says Owen supports ISIS and defends child brides.
No, he
I don't know.
No, he doesn't. You're just I have never heard him say anything like that. All he said was that there are fundamentalists in America who want the same thing, which is true. Like, you can look at that article written by the Federalists justifying that pedophile, what's his name? Oh God. Roy Moore. And saying that, there's a biblical precedence for what he did.
He also says, understand no one knew about the Holocaust before the war. Before we got involved, yes, and FDR knew about the extermination of Jews under Hitler's final solution as early as November of 1942. And he didn't really do much at the time. I will say that I don't think Owen was supporting ISIS. I don't think anyone would, in their right mind, support ISIS. Yeah. I thought you were saying you were for a second, Lapis, and I'm like, no, she's trolling. When you said standing, I'm like, no fucking way. You said that means standing for, and I'm like, no way, just no way. Let's see. So supporting child brides is pedo shit. If you do support it, I do consider you to be a pedophile apologist, but exactly. Owen wasn't doing that.
No.
And then he says, napalm hasn't been used in a long time. She said the napalm campaign. The firebombing of Tokyo could be considered a war crime. Mm-hmm. The extermination didn't start till the end of the war.
Yeah.
What? Are you talking about World War II? Because that's not true. It was happening during that time. They were exterminating the Jews.
I think it's like... Is he trying to is he going on some sort of conspiracy theory? No, it was the Soviets who massacred the Jews, not the Nazis.
At the very least, I'm just glad that Aircraft Sparky is not a Holocaust denier. Although that wouldn't surprise. Like, there's some people on here I would not be surprised if they were. I'm not saying Aircraft Sparky is a Holocaust denier. Not saying that at all. It's just I'm not surprised anymore if people do think that is the case.
And that's
I have heard
of how far public discourse has fallen. That like it used to be that if you were a Holocaust denier, like you're out, like you're done. You have nothing important to say anymore. But now it's like, and then it's another bad position.
Yep, and we must debate them. We must promote them. We must let them on our show to speak their bullshit. Like, the worst thing that was ever said on my program was Humane going on some fucking tangent about the Bible and what it had to say about gay people, and Sparky saying the exact same shit. Owen isn't in his right mind. No one would ever accuse him of such. Aircraft Sparky clarifies, saying, yes, the mass extermination didn't start until around the final years of the war. You said earlier no one knew about the Holocaust. Okay, no one knew about the Holocaust before the war. That is true. We didn't really necessarily know about the... Okay, so I misread that. Yes. We didn't necessarily know the ramifications until after the war, where we found out the atrocities that occurred under Hitler's Nazi regime. Mm-hmm. As for the extermination, it didn't start until the end of the war, and then you say the mass extermination didn't start till around the final years. Well, which one is it? I wouldn't have a problem with you saying until around the final years, because I would rather accept that than it didn't start till the end of the war. No one knew about the Holocaust until the camps were discovered. I agree. I do believe that the general public did not know until, or may not have known until maybe around near the end, where we uncovered the nasty truth behind it all. Mm-hmm. And I don't know about you, but Aircraft Sparky says we did not fight Nazis to save the Jews. Maybe not. Maybe we didn't, but we fought them because of the fascism and tyranny they were showing, and that's something the United States does stand against. Now, I don't know about Lapis here, but I've always found it interesting is what if FDR survived through his fourth term? Like, maybe he wouldn't have sought a fifth term, which I
can only have so many terms before it starts to be like, okay, can you just go already? Like, you may be the best politician in the world, but you start sticking around too long, and a corruption is inevitably going to set in.
Yeah, and I think FDR was a bad president for a few things. Putting Japanese in internment camps, attempting to expand the Supreme Court. He knew about the Nazi regime. He actually did know about the extermination of Jews happening in 19...
more, yeah.
Yeah, like, so he's not above criticism. Mm-hmm. I can hear some reverb a little bit. Let's see, the chat. So I will say that Aircraft Sparky, you say some correct things. We fought the Nazis to save the UK and France. I don't really have a point of contention with that. If Hitler never started... Go ahead.
I just wanted to share about to prove Owen's point that there are like religious fundamentalists in the United States who will defend child marriage. Nothing to see here. The allegations that a man in his early 30s dated teenage girls.
Oh my God.
He dated her. They've been married for 100 years. This is a wonderful marriage. He's 14 years younger than Roy Moore. He's as clean as a hound's tooth. Take the Bible. Zachariah and Elizabeth, for instance. Zachariah was extremely old to marry Elizabeth, and they became the parents of John the Baptist. And also take Joseph and Mary. Mary was a teenager, and Joseph was an adult carpenter. They became the parents of Jesus. There's nothing immoral or illegal here. Maybe just a bit unusual. So you see that there are fundamentalists. Like, Owen's completely right. There are fundamentalists in the United States who will justify child marriage, who will justify it, in the name of God.
Hardcore Islam is hardcore Christianity spelled in a different way. Whenever I see some Bible-thumping, ultra-fundy Christian with the Bible and the American flag and an assault rifle, it reminds me of a Muslim, whether it's besides the point, whether wearing their outfit, with an assault rifle, the Quran, and if they're a part of ISIS, the ISIS flag itself. So to me, there's hardly a difference between hardcore fundy Christian and hardcore radical Muslim. I will say that I think, personally, if I ever did believe in God, I could not join Christianity or Islam. I think Islam is a rapist death cult, just like how I think Christianity is an apologetic system for slavery, and it makes apologies for slavery. And it is, if you followed the Quran or the Bible to its conclusion, you'd be a criminal. Brandon Padgett says anyone who thinks child marriage should be illegal needs to be shot in the face. Philosophically, and if we went with a more radical S-man, you're damn right.
Radical S-man. Oh,
yes. Yes. But if we go with the more realistic S-man, which is the buzzkill sometimes, as much as it would be great if the mother of the person who thinks that child marriage is fine, if that mom would have, quote unquote, fall down the stairs or got a DeLorean and went back in time to have the abortion. Personally, I have no sympathy for people who think child marriage is fine. I have no sympathy with Nazis. I don't have any sympathy with people who have these backwards beliefs that do harm people. Like, I just can't feel sympathy for them. Like, if Richard Spencer was in my hometown and someone ran up to him and they just Ray Riced him, why the hell should I feel sorry for that guy? Like, here's the thing, right? If a guy's saying women who show a little bit of skin deserve to be sexually battered, and someone just punches that fucker in his face, corrects his buck teeth or something, or maybe knocks some sense into him, why should we feel bad? His rights weren't violated. Yeah, sure, his nose was violated with that person's fist.
They'll be like, but, you have to have polite discourse with him. You're destroying democratic norms.
Jesus Christ.
That's my classical liberal voice.
Oh God, classical liberal makes me cringe. Just like the liberalist bullshit.
Liberalism.
I need my liberalism. We must have the rational discourse.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I did want to show you this image. It was probably the one you were thinking of with the two women.
That exactly was the meme I was thinking of when I said that. There is no difference.
It's true. Quran, Bible, both wearing suns, both, extremely nationalistic and prideful. They are so similar, these women. And the funny thing is that they would hate each other so much.
Mm-hmm.
Despite being so similar.
Like, I don't have a problem if you're nationalistic. Like, if you're a civic nationalist, I'll still think it's weird and a little creepy, but I don't really care if you are. But if you're a white nationalist, get out of my sight. Like, if you call yourself a patriot, like, I think Aircraft Sparky might think of himself as a patriot, and that's totally cool. I don't care. I love America. I don't love the government and its actions, but I love the country. I think this country's great.
Mm-hmm.
Does it have a lot of problems? You're damn right it does. I don't know if Lapis loves it. Go ahead.
I like the people of America. I like the wildlife of America. I think American culture is a bit of a mixed bag, but I despise the government of the United States and its actions abroad.
I despise the government as well. I do despise its foreign policy. I do despise the states for blatantly harming their own people.
Yeah.
I extremely dislike the education policy of the United States.
Ugh, standardized testing.
Well, it's actually really not that. It's rather this, we must have abstinence-only sex education.
Oh, that's stupid too.
To me, every time it doesn't work. It's been shown not to work, because in states where they have that bullshit, the pregnancy is up.
Yeah. Like, the teens are just having so many kids while at the same time, going to Bible camp every summer. Like,
yep.
It's at some point you have to take the L and admit that what you're doing isn't working.
Mm-hmm. There was also what is it? God damn it! There's also there's this thing about Lapis. It's also, my problem is I want the states to be, as much as I hate with a passion abstinence-only sex education, I do want states to be able to kind of make the decision about education at their own pace, as I don't think Washington is all that equipped sometimes to be able to make all those decisions. Not necessarily saying privatize education, but delegate authority over education more locally.
Well, yeah. I don't know. I take a somewhat different track in that I think definitely get rid of some of the excesses, like the pointless standardized tests. But I think that more needs to be done to fund education to assure that like all schools are decent, because you're looking at education currently in the United States is funded off of property tax in the county, and what this results in is that poor Black counties and other counties that are populated by people of color have incredibly terrible educational services. No heating. The desks are falling apart. They're running out of pencils. All this sort of thing. No running water sometimes. And then you go to the segregated suburban white community, and the public schools are, just fine and wonderful. And so I think what needs to happen is that the federal government does need to give more funding to these schools that are falling behind, or even the state government, just so everyone has a chance at a decent education.
Yeah, I would pull a JFK on education in that sense. When you mentioned that some schools are still segregated, which, if that ever were to happen, if I were president or governor, your boy president or governor S-man would end that shit with an executive order. JFK and Dwight D. Eisenhower did this during their presidencies. Mm-hmm. Dwight D. Eisenhower desegregated by using the National Guard to do so. He did so by using the Arkansas National Guard to do so in 1957, and I think it was either in 1963. Governor of Alabama George Wallace, a perennial candidate for president, thank God he was never president, blocked the doors. Yeah, he blocked the doors of an Alabama school as a few Black kids were trying to go to the school. JFK says, "Joke's on you, LOL. I'm the president." Sends in the Alabama National Guard over the orders of the governor to desegregate that school. To me, I thought JFK was a fucking savage. Like, if I could find a phone call between the two, just have a moment where you just see like JFK goes thug life on a segregationist governor. Mm-hmm. With Wallace himself, he did later regret doing that.
Wallace is a very interesting man because he actually initially ran for the Democratic Party on a platform of desegregation. Later, he changed to segregation to win votes. And I guess that kind of shows, like, this is what happens when you become an unprincipled politician and sell out your values for votes. You become remembered as, like, one of history's greatest monsters. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but probably one of the worst governors in U.S. history.
He ran for president, like, repeatedly, and, like, he seemed to understand. I feel like he may have, when he was shot, which I'm not saying he deserved to be shot, I just can't feel bad for him all that much. But I guess he realized the type of pain and misery he caused people by fighting for segregation, and he changed his mind. He apologized. He asked for forgiveness to African Americans of the United States. Became a born-again Christian, which, regardless of whether you think born-again is crazy, I at least was happy that he saw the pain he caused and was trying to change that.
I mean, it's always good when people learn from their mistakes and try to change. Like, I don't think it erases the evil he did, but like, it just shows that, people can change and that good things can happen sometimes.
Yeah. Like, when I was reading up about his, when he was running for president and he actually got electoral votes, that election was pretty fishy to begin with, but I always found it fascinating just reading up about his governorship, reading up about how he ran for president so many times, and hearing his own voice talking about his regret. That, to me, I thought he was a genuinely bad person when he was governor, but when he finally left the governorship for the final time, I think he became a better person.
Yeah, he redeemed himself a bit.
Yeah. I don't think he was a piece of shit when he died. I just thought he was a rather piece of shit when he was running all those times advocating for segregationism.
Yeah.
But speaking of education as well, if I was the president of the United States or the governor of my home state where education funding is something the Democrats bring up all the time, I would sign an executive order and see who is going to have the cojones to stop me. I would sign an executive order delegating funding to I'm going to be accused of being a socialist by the logic of some of the extreme writers, but here's the thing. If a school but if a school does not have enough funding, however much funding they need, they would get. Now, either we would cut the funding of some schools to reappropriate it,
Mm-hmm.
or, and here's the thing: all presidents do have economic advisors. I would more instruct them to find, okay, where's the fat? Where's the excess? Where's the not necessary? Like, use all the euphemisms and until they're like, Mr. President or Governor. No disrespect, but it's been 5 days. I got your point after the third analogy. You know, and tell them, do not make it too obvious that you're looking for ways to cut the fat, and reappropriate that money. Like,
yeah, you could probably cut Congress's salary.
You're not gonna be shocked as I tell you this, but the 27th Amendment, which I think had something to do with it, about Congress's pay. Let me pull up the 27th, and I was rather unsurprised.
So what does it say? The 27th Amendment? You're going to read it all?
27th Amendment. I'll try to sum it up, but 27th Amendment. Let me Google it. Speaking of Google it, she DM'd me a few days ago. Well, she DM'd me yesterday about the music video. She was fucking in all caps saying, "Oh my god." You know, she was just fucking laughing. She said she thought it was hilarious when I said his mic was as shitty as his own microphone. Okay, so the 27th Amendment to the Constitution says no law varying the compensation for the services of the senators and representatives will take effect until an election of representatives have intervened. I thought this had something to do with their pay. Oh, yes, it does. Their salary. And this didn't shock me whatsoever that this passed at all. Like, normally you might as well pull out a tooth to pass an amendment to have it ratified. It was first submitted on September 25th, 1889, a good negative 212 years before I was born, which, man, the good old days of where medicine was not that advanced. Let's see. So the revival of the interest came in 1982, but it finally passed relatively quickly on May 7th, 1992. Because it passed the 3/4 requirement for ratification.
Yeah.
If I could, I'm just saying, if I could just do it, there's a lot of amendments I would have. If I could have snuck in some words in the 22nd Amendment, your boy would have included not just the president gets term limits, but the vice president, all senators, representatives, and maybe even governors and mayors. You know, so when they passed it to prevent the president from getting too powerful, they all would have been up shit's creek.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
because like the governor of California, hasn't he been in power like 8 times?
Actually, he's a rather interesting character. He was a 2-term governor from 75 to 83, and he's not eligible to be reelected. Why he's been in power for so long is he ran for a 3rd term in 2010, he got it, and for a 4th one in 2014, and he got it. However, in the 1990s, the state of California passed an amendment saying no governor can be elected to more than 2 terms, but it does not apply to previous governors. So he cannot run for a 3rd consecutive or 5th non-consecutive term. I don't really personally like the governor of California for a few key decisions, but in my state, we used to have term limits. 3 terms, you're out. Now you can be in there as long as you are, as you're eligible to be reelected. Mm-hmm. If we had term limits, the governor of my state, he has served 2 full terms in his own right. Well, he's done with he's about to be done in 2020. 2008 was the re-election of his lieutenant governorship, and I read up on politicians so I don't say something factually wrong. And also, I just find politicians fascinating for how heartless, how unempathetic, how blatantly wrong they are in some things, how just bad of people they are. It just makes me fascinated. So
it's funny seeing how people sell out. How much more can you sell out? How much more of your soul can you destroy? And they always find a way to disappoint.
They know the way to sell out their soul. So when the governor he was serving under actually Aircraft Sparky actually agrees with us about about term limits. It's the job of Congress to appropriate funds. An executive order appropriating funds is unconstitutional. If that's the case, okay, then never mind on that. If that's the case, I do believe he probably is right. 3 branches of government for a reason. I agree. However, I think at some point you have to step in and say, you guys aren't doing your fucking job that you were elected to do. And that's why I usually do endorse people who are third-party candidates, because I feel like they do have the intent Demopublicans or Republicrats often lack. I mean, not generalizing, but still. But anyway, when the governor he was serving under resigned to be an ambassador under George W. Bush, he became governor. He won a special election they did, and he won a full term in his own right in 2012 and a second full term in 2016. If we had a term limit thing where if you serve more than 2 years of the person you were serving under their unexpired term, he would be term limited right now. He would be out of office by the time it's 2021. That is how it should be for all governorships. The 22nd Amendment says if I let's say you were president, you were the first female president of the United States, and I was your vice president. Let's say you resigned because you had some health problem, or you sadly passed away, or what happened.
Yeah.
Whatever happens. And let's say you did it within a year of being president.
Or I was mysteriously thrown out of a helicopter.
Yeah. If that happened, I would become president, but if I serve more than 2 years of your unexpired term, I can only have 1 term in my own right. If I only serve 2 years of your term, I would be eligible for 2 terms in my own right.
So
now
theoretically, you could become president for 10 years.
Yes, that's what the Constitution does say. Maximum of 10 years if that's the case, 8 years if you're elected on your own. Now, with the vice presidency, there is no term limits. But let's say you hanged me with a piano wire and you threw me out of the helicopter with cinder blocks as my parachute. Mysteriously, you could appoint a vice president under the Constitution. It's happened twice. So we've had 46 elected vice presidents, but we've had only 2 designated vice presidents.
It's a shame no one did that to Dan Quayle.
Huh?
I said it's a shame no one did that to Dan Quayle.
Yeah, I thought Bush could have made a better choice for a vice president.
A potato would have made a better choice.
I do like a better vice president. There's term limits for the POTUS. Cannot be POTUS for more than 10 years. Well, obviously, like maximum of 10 years.
Yeah.
Sadly, it's left to uneducated masses to vote for others to represent them. So usually people just vote for the incumbent. BP appointments must be approved through the Senate. Actually, you are right. For instance, the first time it happened was under Gerald Ford when Spiro Agnew resigned the vice presidency.
Why did he resign?
He had a lot of scandals, alleged tax bribery when he was governor of Maryland. He was the second vice president and so far the last to resign. The first one did because he had 5 months left on his term. He was not going to be the running mate in the election. He's like, well, and he wanted to become a senator again, so he just resigned and that was John C. Calhoun. The second vice president to be appointed was Nelson Rockefeller, who I think was a rather fascinating character because he was a moderate Republican. Yeah. And I do tend to like moderate Republicans. Yes, an odd specimen. And to me, I kind of do like Nelson Rockefeller. I did not like when the Republicans would shit on him for the fact he was remarried.
It was so bizarre. Like, what?
So morally bankrupt.
Like, back then, that was a big scandal, and it's because of that whole moralizing hoo-ha. They ended up with what's-a-face, Barry Goldwater, who was a disaster.
Oh yeah, if he would have been president, I think that oh my God, Sparky, I think if Goldwater would have become president, I think we probably would have had the Daisy ad come true, and the I mean, yeah, they didn't mention him by name, but I think that ad did more than enough to damage his reputation. His military, he was a bit of a libertarian, but foreign policy, he was definitely not.
Like really hawkish.
Very, very hawkish, there was, Hubert Humphrey, when he was running for president, I think that Nixon interfered with the whole, with saying if I get elected, I'll give you a better deal, so they would refuse to cooperate with President Humphrey. Aircraft Sparky in the chat says Spiro Agnew, lol. And then he says the Rockefellers are historically insane, too much inbreeding, the Rockefeller and Vanderbilts. I don't know much about the Vanderbilts, but I'll Google that.
Well, they're both like rich American families that have been rich since they came and will probably be rich long after we're dead, unless I get my way.
Oh man, I don't know about that, but I first heard Nelson Rockefeller, and then there was his brother, who they were actually a very odd pair, very rare for the fact they were both governors of a state at the same time. And then George W. Bush and Jeb Bush were at the same time decades later. I, Jeb Bush, do solemnly swear that I am qualified to be governor of the state of Florida.
It's funny with the Bush. Like, can you imagine what it would have been like with him as president instead of Trump?
Probably more stable, let's be honest, and less immature. I would have rather had the... Go ahead.
It's just the thing is, it would have been like, I would have felt like so despairing of American politics. I'm like, oh God, not like it's either a Clinton or a Bush, Clinton or a Bush. Like there's really no choice.
And then someone in America would be beating around the bush. I had to make that pun, and you saw that in the lyrics I sent you.
Yeah.
It would have been interesting if instead of Obama, it would be Clinton and then succeeded by Bush. That would be strange, because Trump effectively ended the Clinton-Bush dynasty by winning. From 1981 until 2016, the Clinton-Bush dynasty was strong. When Hillary Clinton left the position as Secretary of State after Jeb Bush left the governorship of Florida, it technically ended because there was hardly a Clinton or Bush in a national office, or a state office altogether. Yeah. I mean, one of the Bushes is in a state office right now, but I mean, whether you're a governor but there's no Bush in national office or a Clinton, so it's over effectively. And I don't like political dynasties. Like if my grandfather was in the House of Representatives because he was appointed Sparky. Jen Bush would have been horrible POTUS. Jeb.
Bush?
Yeah, he meant to say Jeb. It turns out it's his full name, like the acronym. I would have gone by Jeb too. If my middle name was Ellis, I'd be pissed. Ellis. I think it's John Ellis Bush.
Oh my goodness. I,
John Ellis Bush, do solemnly swear.
I can't take that seriously. Like,
let me see if I got that right. I think I got that right.
Bush
Jeb
like,
Bush.
It's not a very good last name to start with, but when it's like Ellis, like
let's see. And I'm going to screen share because I know no one's going to believe this shit, but be prepared, everybody. Let's see. Jeb Bush. John Ellis Jeb Bush Sr. Please clap.
Jeb.
Oh my God.
Look at that face.
He's like, please clap. Oh my God, you know you're terrible when you have to literally beg the people you're campaigning in front of to clap. Oh my God. And I mean,
yeah.
I would have rather had a third Bush presidency than a. Sure, it isn't Jebediah. I thought it was Jebediah for a while until I saw it. That'd be. I consider that child abuse. But I don't know. I always find elections to be interesting, and I always found politicians to be fascinating because it's like the impact they leave. Like the governorship of Jerry Brown is regarded by the Democrats as a good one. while the governorship of Arnold Schwarzenegger, Chris Christie, and Jesse Ventura, non-Democrats, have been regarded as pretty bad. I think there's no way to defend Christie.
No, he close down traffic despite a rival, like a political rival, and then
I think so.
And then when he on the 4th of July, he ordered everyone off the beach except his own family.
Yeah, his approval rating, like 15% approve versus 85% that disapprove. Can you even imagine? Like, I mean, if I had an approval rating that bad, I wouldn't care, because it's like, I'm term limited, like he was. I'm term limited. I'm not running for re-election. And you'd have to be the most vulnerable of any political candidate if your approval rating is that bad. The governor of Alaska has an underwater approval rating, and to me, if I could have included that in the 22nd in a term limit amendment, you would have to have an approval rating above 50% in order to run for re-election.
As opposed to being approved by 20% of the population.
Yeah.
Although normally the party selects you out, and when you're that unpopular, they're just no, we're not going to run you.
Yeah, we're not going to renominate you. Only one president did not get renominated. Usually they either don't run again or they
Is this the Sparky again?
Yeah, he says Chris Christie is a fat fucker. He needs to be put in a fat concentration camp. Sparky.
Well, I mean, Sparky's not so slim himself.
Jesus, Sparky, you know how to make a man laugh. Holy fuck. Chris Christie. There's actually a parody song of the 2016 election. I recommend you all watch it. It's art. It's called Straight Outta Options. It's great. Everyone is parodied. Bernie Sanders, Hillary Clinton, Donald Trump, Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush is like, my brother was president. That's bad luck, because when he left, the economy sucked. Fly the sign. Mission accomplished. The Bush is back, boy. You're running straight out of options. Oh, it's so great. And he just looks so crazy and out of his mind in that music video. Aircraft Sparky says, I'm not that fat either. I tend not to make fat jokes because I'm not the slimmest myself. I mean, I've lost quite a bit of weight this year, thank God. Yes. But I mean, if someone mocks my weight, or mocks my appearance, then I just go Pinochet on them and just chuck their self-esteem out of a helicopter if they do it to me. If they don't do it to me, then I'm not going to say anything. There's some people I've met who are so thin I would offer them a sandwich. That would be Owen and Zach and Mjolnir Man. Mjolnir Man. He does make that beat I sent you of his. I really liked listening to it a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, you have to meet this Mjolnir Man one day.
Yeah, he's a rare uploader. He does videos about whatever his mind is on. He used to be a huge political junkie, like yours truly kind of is right now. He used to be a right libertarian, and now he's on the left. Not necessarily a communist, but he's left.
Cult of Ham, or left of Ham?
I think around the same area of Cult of Ham.
Okay.
Mjolnir Man is fine with punching Nazis. He's half Ashkenazi Jew, and he said he regretted ever saying we shouldn't punch Nazis.
So when
if you look at his after the election of 2016, he said he'd been questioning it for a while. He left libertarianism. I think he's the type of leftist who's not necessarily anti-capitalist, but he does want a welfare state. That's the vibe I get from him. What is that Pillsbury Doughboy fucker's name? What is it? Regressive voice. Yes, that guy. he said we'd have capitalism, but it would be like heavy-ass welfare state.
Mm.
Cult of Ham is a big bag of doo-doo, says Aspie. What the fuck? and then Aircraft Sparky also says, Chris Christie is as wide as he is tall. The man has his own gravitational pull. I'm going to start identifying as left, Aircraft Sparky says. Well, on your plane, Aircraft Sparky, you can lean a little to the left wing of your plane. And then Aspie says, I can't cuss. Bruh, you cussed at Naked Ape once.
Naked Ape deserves it. Naked Ape is an asshole.
Yeah, Naked Ape makes me like, he's so goddamn nasally. He makes me feel like I'm not a nasally piece of shit. I mean,
I hate his voice. I hate it so much. Whenever I hear it, I just like, ugh. How does this guy have so many subscribers? How do they bear to listen to that like nails on a chalkboard voice?
They were probably forced to listen to that as children, and that's all they know. Hell, in fact, if you do scratch nails on a chalkboard, that's actually a new code. You know, if I do this,
Ooh.
that is a new code for capitalism did nothing wrong. Or if I do this, that is a new sign of capitalism will fall. If you don't do it like that, you end up translating that you want to overthrow communist nations. But anyway, Cody Ray 19 says, Chris Christie reminds me of the Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. Aircraft Sparky says, I want to start a death note state for all those that oppose me. Well, that was Pinochet, Sparky. That was Pinochet.
Yeah. Which is defended by a certain black fascist.
Like I said earlier, he's a blashist.
Like there's nothing libertarian about his opinions.
Yes, like
I'm not a libertarian, but like I recognize what libertarianism is, and I can debate its characteristics, and I don't mind libertarians. That's not libertarianism. That has nothing to do with libertarianism.
I'm a libertarian, but women shouldn't have the right to vote or participate in the political process. But I'm still a libertarian. But I think you're a leftist. Pinochet did nothing wrong. My God, it was like, you're not a libertarian, dude. You're just a psycho conservative. Like, holy shit. And then like he calls himself a Jeffersonian liberal, and I'm like, what the fuck is
it? Yeah, it's just like he's not a classical liberal. Like I don't even like classical liberalism. I think it's like a pretentious way of saying asshole, but it's still like he's not even a classical liberal.
Yeah. Tom Savage says, "Hello, fags. Summer is almost here, so that homework better be finished." Guess what, boy? That homework is finished.
How does that?
Aircraft Sparky says capitalism. Huh?
Capitalism?
What?
What does he say about it? Aircraft Sparky. What does he say about capitalism?
He says capitalism is a good boy with an I instead of a Y for boy. So instead, actually, I should say it like this. He's saying that capitalism is a good boy. It's a good boy, not a good boy, but a good boy.
I don't know. I think capitalism is a bad boy.
Libertarianism is classical liberalism.
Libertarianism is classical liberalism, he says. I don't know. I think there are a few differences.
So if capitalism was a dog, you'd be like, bad boy. Actually, no.
Yeah. Like, I don't think that they're identical. I think classical liberalism...
Let me see here. If communism or socialism is a pet, it would be a cat.
I'd say so. I'd agree. I'm a cat person.
Capitalism is a dog because it's lovable, it's furry, and
it's dumb
to jump up on you to give you a hug. How dare you call dogs dumb? How dare you? You're dog phobic. Lapis, everybody, is dog phobic. Check your human privilege, you non-otherkin bigot. or something. I don't know. Aspie does the better version, but I will say that I'm more of a dog person than a cat person. Aircraft Sparky says, if communism/socialism was a pet, it would need to be put down. Like you take out in the middle of a field, in little commies, like, why I'm not ill, and you'd be like, yes, you are. No, if I had a cat that was somehow communist,
How?
yeah, like if it somehow was, or if it was a dog that was a commie, I would never call it a good boy, but I wouldn't shoot it. If my dog was a capitalist, we'd be shooting the shit, making fun of commies. I'll be right back. I gotta get some water. Be right back.
I think like it's pretty late where I am, so I'd say we should end this stream here.
Actually, yeah, let's do that.
I mean, I love, as much as I love shooting the shit with you, S-Man. Like it's like 1 where I am, so.
Actually, no problem. It's probably a good idea to end it before it goes on till it's like YouTube is like, bruh, this stream should have been ended 30 minutes ago, and we'll be like, how long did this go on for? And they'll be like, it's gone on for 8.5 hours. Holy shit. Anyway, so that is where we'll wrap up, everybody. My closing statement is, actually, I don't have one because you guys know my thoughts on it. And as always, everybody, when it comes to socialism and communism, absolute lolcows. When it comes to gender identity, like I said, I don't really mind what you call yourself. It's your business. And as always, you can't spell lapis without the L. Till next time.
Ta-ta.